Are we admitting people, or should we go ahead and get started, Sid?
We admitted the attendees, but you have to wait till a little after 7:30.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, I misread. I saw the thing go up about, but that was just recording, I think.
Yeah, there are participants in place.
You're good now, Chair.
We're live. All right. I want to welcome you to this meeting of the Albany, California Social and Economic Justice Commission, which is convened for a regular meeting beginning at 7:30 today. Our agenda is posted online, and we'll talk about procedures to be recognized when we come to the various moments of public comment. Before we begin our meeting, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which we are gathered. For thousands of years, this land has been Huichen and surrounding areas, including an adjacent to ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo Ohlone and Bay Miwok, recognized in the Verona Band of Alameda County, whose descendants now include members of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people, and they have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries, even as they suffered from colonization and displacement. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands. All right, thank you for joining us. Sid, shall we do the roll call?
Yes, I will do that. Commissioner Gary?
Present.
Commissioner Grossman?
Here,
Commissioner Kurz absent? Commissioner Marks?
Here.
Chair Downs?
Here. Before we go to the approval of the minutes, I also wanted to take the privilege of the chair and just offer our condolences individually and collectively for an Albany resident who recently passed, Elaine Obando Videa Penguelo, partner of Jeremiah Penguelo, a frequent and active participant in SEJC and in many Albany community events. She was a attorney, an activist, a proud Albany resident, and someone who passed quite recently. So we should ask you to take a moment to remember her and to recognize the loss in the entire community, and especially in the community of, and especially in the life of her partner. Thank you. Our next agenda item is the approval of the minutes. The September 1 draft minutes are available on the website of the Albany SEJC. If you can see a highlighted blue hyperlink, if you're looking on a computer now or on a smartphone, if you click on that, that'll open that in a separate window. Would ask commissioners to review the draft minutes and to let us know if they have emendations or if there's a motion on them.
I motion to approve.
Marks. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Gary. I had started to recognize Commissioner Marks. I'm sorry.
That's fine. Go, she can go.
I move to accept the minutes.
All right. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay. Is there any discussion? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go to vote. Commissioner Marks?
Yes.
Commissioner Grossman?
yes.
Commissioner Gary?
Yes.
And I vote yes. So the minutes are approved for the September 1 meeting. Appreciate that. We now move to number 3. This is for public comment. Public comment is for people desiring to address the commission on an item that's not on the agenda. You will note that on the agenda include a number of items where we will also include public comments specific to those items, including the equity impact plan, the subcommittees of the equity impact plan, the equity statement, communication outreach, mental health services, and Albany Project Hope. So on each of those items on the agenda, there will be opportunities for specific public comment. This section is for public comment on issues that are not on the agenda. We'll ask each speaker to raise their hand and they'll be called in and recognized. Ask them to limit their remarks to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits the commission's ability to take and or discuss items that are not on the agenda. So such items as are raised now may be referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda. If we have hands raised, then city staff will begin to bring people in one at a time, and I will acknowledge you when I see you as active within the meeting. So Jeremiah Pinguelo, we welcome you, and we are sorry extend our condolences for your loss.
I appreciate you opening the meeting with that. Everybody, if you never knew Elaine, we're married. We got married January 18th on her birthday, 2018. She's a doctor, Dr. Elaine Irene Obando Vadea, Esquire. She's a doctor of jurisprudence, which is law. Elaine graduated from the University of California, Berkeley on May 22nd, 1993. She graduated from Golden Gate University School of Law, May 19th, 2001. And she was admitted as an attorney and counselor at law by the Supreme Court Justice, the California State Bar. Her number was 216718. And she got admitted in 2001. She was duly admitted in the Northern California District, 2002. And she worked in Emeryville for Mount Cotton, Bishop Barry, and the Emeryville Watergate Towers for years. And she's the top writer of her firm and the top litigator. If anybody didn't know, she lived right in the heart of our community, and she loved helping people. Elaine successfully opened her law office on Solano, and she was helping anybody out. They didn't have money or whatever money they could afford. And when she was in court, she had won 100% of her cases, and people could check the state bar for that. Also, I don't know if anybody knew, but she's a dancer. She taught a Zumba class in the Eat of the Stone room at the Albany Library, and it was all through the Alameda County Library, and everything was legit. And there's so much to say about Elaine, but I know that her loving, bright spirit and her beautiful presence really graced our communities and Solano Stroll and Dinner with Albany. So many people got to meet her and see her love. And of course, she volunteered at the Albany Giltrack Farm, and she brought flowers to the community shower project. She loved helping people at the showers. And the police department and the fire department, she'd always bring cards for Christmas and mistletoe. And, this unfortunate passing of Elaine sure has given the city of Albany a valuable learning opportunity to grow and to actually listen to people in need of assistance. While teaching others to take baby steps. She'd always say that, and to take action in the moment. And hopefully Albany will fully more recognize and support our community's needs. And, when people are asking for help, you listen and don't ignore anybody for months and months and months. So thank you, everybody, for loving Elaine. And thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you for those comments, Jeremiah, and for that reflection on her presence. Not seeing other public comment for this section. We will move on to staff and commission member announcements. I think we have staff announcements, and so if so, we can go first, and then we'll take commission member announcements. Am I right, Sid, that there are staff announcements? I think you're still muted.
Yes, I do. I was good first timing go around. Let me get my announcements up here. I just have a couple. A few weeks ago, the city started an evacuation assistance registry. I'm sure we've all heard about it. This is a volunteer registry for Albany residents to let our first responders know that they might need assistance during an emergency. This is a registration is completely voluntary. The registration information was posted on the city website, all the information, and we sent it out in the e-news. We've delivered hard copies to all of our meal delivery clients. We're making phone calls to vulnerable individuals via the Senior Center and Albany Cares databases. Staff is also available to help those that need assistance to complete the registration. We can mail them forms if needed with the information and the registration form. To get that information and help, please call our information line at 510-524-9122. And please, everyone listening tonight and commissioners, please spread the word and let everybody know at this opportunity to let our first responders know if you need assistance. My second announcement is the Social Equity and Inclusion webpage. The new webpage, which is in addition to the regular e-news weekly posting, is now live on the city website to better connect to the work that's being done on this topic. The quick link to find the page is our website, albanyca.org, with a slash and social equity, one word. The social equity and inclusion FAQs that were put together by the subcommittee has its own tab, and it is listed on that website as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those, Sid. So again, the FAQs that I think I see Commissioner Grossman.
I just wanted to thank you for the work you did on the questions. I know it wasn't easy to get people to do that, so I appreciate you putting in the time.
And so again, if you click, in case it's not completely intuitive, once you click onto the FAQs on the Social Equity and Inclusion page, you'll see down under FAQs, if you click on that, you'll see the list of questions. And if you click on the questions, you'll get a pop-up box with the answer, at least in the browser that I use. There may be some variation. So yes, we want to express our gratitude and the quick work. It is a number, 43 is the number I see right now. And there's a lot of information there, much of which is drawn from questions that, to my understanding, Commissioner Grossman and Commissioner Marks and our neighborhood services manager and others pulled from questions submitted to SEJC and to other fora. So we encourage you and hope that having them there helps to establish a base of information that we can all refer to. So we appreciate that a lot. Thank you. Does that conclude staff announcements, Ed? I didn't want to cut you off in our gratitude. Thank you. So we'll move now to announcements from commissioners. I first want to apologize that we do not have a separate agenda item on the vandalism at the Gill Tract. I apologize for not ensuring that was on the agenda. And I know Commissioner Marks had asked that to be put on, and just wanted to acknowledge that I should have made sure that it was on the agenda. So I apologize for that. Something we take seriously and we'll look forward to addressing. Other commissioner announcements. Commissioner Marks.
There was a student-led initiative in Albany, mostly led by high school students, called Diversify Our Narrative. They got almost 1,000 signatures. And the school board has adopted the Diversify Our Narrative and wants to raise $50,000 to help purchase anti-racist material, written materials. So if you want to contribute to that, please go on the Board of Education website. If you go to Diversify Our Narrative, it'll send you to a link that you can donate so that we can get this going in our high school. As I said, the students led this, so it's a really great, important thing that the students want to do. And I hope that we can all support them in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you sharing that. That's an important effort. In other commissioner announcements. All right. Not seeing others, then I think item number 5 is presentations. I'm not aware that we have any presentations. Is that right? Okay, no presentations. So now we move to item 6. So there's a number of items in item 6. We will take public comment just to assure you of how to, for those of you wishing to be heard, that we will take public comment separately on 6-1, 6-2, 6-3, 6-4, 6-5, 6-6. So you don't have to worry that it's 6-1 is your only chance for public comment, as you'll see that some of them are interrelated and some of them are quite distinct. So I think it makes sense to allow people who wish to speak on mental health services, for example, to do that at the time when that comes up on 6-5. Item 6-1 is the Equity Impact Plan Interim Council update. So this is a chance for us to communicate about our engagement with City Council in the September meeting about the steps of the Equity Impact Plan. The consultants are here, and I know that they plan to speak on 6-2 and 6-3. I don't think that they have something planned for 6-1, but if we want to ask them for input, we can. So what my proposal is that we make initial comments on this, then we look toward public comment, and then we return for further discussion if that's amenable. So any thoughts on our interim council update? We'll be talking about the specifics of the Equity Impact Plan, the subcommittees, and the equity statement in 6-2, 6-3. But anything specifically we want to say about the council update? I have a couple things, but I don't want to go first. Unless nobody else wants to go. I know that, time both moves very quickly and very slowly. So as a recollection, council included both a special session, prior to its regular session. There, was a discussion with council about where we stand. I think, I don't have a tremendous amount in the way of general updates. One thing that came out in the regular meeting, not of the last council meeting, but of the one before, came up actually in the regular meeting on a discussion of the working group and task force, where city staff asked council to clarify what role SEJC would have on policing if such a task force were created. One of the council members suggested that SEJC have no role in any way, which would include dismantling our subcommittee on policing that is meant and essentially making wasted the money that the city has spent on consulting services for that, and also would mean charging that task force with doing the 10-year equity action plan when that was something that the working group never was suggested that it be included. Public speakers, including some of us, raised this issue. And, it was not acted upon, nor was the whole proposal to create a task force on policing for a, short-term 6 to 9 month task force on policing was also not acted upon, nor was it acted upon at the meeting yesterday. My belief is that it'll likely be on the agenda for the next council meeting. But separate from that, I would encourage SEJC to stay alert and active. That apparently at any moment there may be a suggestion to dismantle subcommittees that we already have in progress. and to, make wasted the money and time that had been spent before it can even be utilized, and to change other agendas of other groups, apparently simply to prevent us from having any say whatsoever. And so I would say that if we believe that even in the limited framework of the long-term framework of the policing subcommittee, which is to come up with a 10-year plan, not to resolve the immediate 6 to 9 month temporary work of the other group, that if we believe that even that should continue, that we should continue to be alert, active, and outspoken at council meetings, because until the public spoke, there was no effort to explain what this proposal by one member of the council would do, or how it would lead to a seeming waste of city resources. Commissioner Grossman.
Yeah. I think the distinction was clear to some people that we were talking about the long term, but another way I think of making the distinction more clear might be, rather than calling our committee policing, calling it public safety.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems to me that if the task force is going to focus on police policies in the short term, which it seems to me what they're going to do, the bigger question that many people are asking is, are there things that the police are doing that could be better and more efficiently done by other professionals? And could we unburden the police from such things as mental health services, etc.? Those are the kinds of things that I would hope we would make recommendations to the council about. Those are long-term things that are distinct from the kinds of things that are the task of the task force. So maybe making that change in name, or at least being clear that that's the focus. That area which it's clear to me the task force is not going to address, because it was never part of their description.
No, I appreciate that comment. Commissioner Furr is not here, but my memory is that she had suggested that very thing in our meeting, and certainly for that reason, I feel as confident as I can without someone here to bring it up. To suggest that the two of us, I believe, are completely amenable to that, and we're talking about that as a framework, not simply for naming, but for focusing. So I really appreciate that part. Other first round comments on this from commissioners before we go to public comment. All right, so now let's take public comment. I see at least one member of the public with their hand raised. If other people would like to be recognized following the first person, please raise your hand so that we know to wave you in. And I believe city staff will bring in Jeremiah Pinguelo. You're not quite on, and now you're on. Welcome, Jeremiah.
Good evening, council. Good evening, Chair Downs. Soon to be council member Gary, and everybody, Sid, and City Clerk Ann. Thank you so much for attending all these meetings. And Margie Marks, thank you for your infinite assistance in the community, and you're definitely involved in the heart of our community. And also, we're speaking on 6-1, correct?
That is correct, Jeremiah.
Great. Affordable housing and economic development. Oh, you guys don't have a blue link for me to click on? I can't click on nothing. That's okay.
So Jeremiah,
affordable housing. Well, I'll tell you what.
Okay, Jeremiah, can I just clarify one thing? So that does come up under the next item. It's 6.2-1 is affordable housing and economic development. Right now, we're doing the 6.1, the equity impact plan interim council update.
Okay, well, your equity impact plan, we have Nicole Anderson that's been here, and it's not a good idea to waste any more of the city's money. So you guys got to keep her around, keep Nicole Anderson around, because that's why we hired her. And equity and equality is what this is all about. And I'm so glad that council members have endorsed Janelle, and we're making some positive changes here. So let's keep up the good work, everybody, because all working together, we can finally make this community right. So keep up the good work.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. We appreciate your comments. I thought I saw another hand come up for comment on 6.1, but now I'm not sure I see it. I see it coming in, David Danby, and you're on.
Hi, thanks. Because the meetings are running, so the city council meetings run so late and the important things tend to be put at the end of the meetings. I wasn't there for this whole discussion part of it. I was there for the first part, what you're referring to tonight. So would it be possible for you to explain a little bit more about, I mean, I heard what you just said, but if there were any more details, I support what Bart said, that if it sounds to me like what you're saying is that there isn't going to be, that this task force from the city is just going to look at the police and not look at racism and not look at all of the kind of the societal issues that we're trying to address. But I'm not really sure that's what you said, but I like Bart's present comments about that, a lot more long-term view of public safety. But it would be really helpful. I didn't go back and listen to the meeting, and I should have. I didn't realize so much happened. And so if I would love some more details. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. So it is a lot to follow, and there's been an interim council meeting, and of course, there's always the possibility that I will, misremember something. In the penultimate city council meeting, the recommendation, and here I do always turn around which is the working group and which is the task force, but of the short-term group to propose to council a 6 to 9 month period group, which to look into policing and to make recommendations to council. So that recommendation, and those meetings mostly took place in August. That recommendation was presented to council. Council did not act on it. And so it was carried over. And the last I heard, the expectation was that it would be on the agenda for the next council meeting. Until the council could act in any way that it, chooses to. So I don't want to, say this is, the what council can do. If they were to operate within the framework of that proposal, that was for a 6 to 9 month, process that would aim to make recommendations for, anything more ongoing to council. That was not acted upon. So until it's acted upon, we don't know what that group will be charged to do or not charged to do. In the midst of that discussion, staff asked for clarification about other commissions or that would also have engagement with issues of policing, and the suggestion was made by one council member to prevent SEJC from having anything to do with policing. The public comment, inserted into that from both commissioners and members of the public, the fact of the difference between the equity action plan, which is in fact what SEJC have been charged by council to enact, the impossibility, as various council members have asserted over the time, of addressing equity, racial equity without addressing police, the necessity of addressing public safety and policing, and the difference between that subcommittee's 10-year window and the 6 to 9 month window that had been proposed by the task force. So there was, as well as just the undesirability of wiping away the work that had been done, including with city funds, to simply apparently to prove a point that SEJC shouldn't say anything about policing. Council did not act on that recommendation of one of its council members. So I don't know, so predictively looking forward, I don't know what council will act upon in terms of a task force, and whether those kinds of suggestions will continue to recur, and whether, once again, it'll depend entirely upon the public to actually clarify to council members what they're being asked to weigh in on. So that's how I understand it, but obviously it is available online, and anyone should, I always encourage my students to check everything I say. So, I encourage people to do so. Anything that any other, I don't see any other hands from members of the public. Do we have any further discussion of this by commissioners? Okay, in that case, we're going to move on to 6.2, which goes to the Equity Impact Plan Subcommittee updates. We have three subcommittees. One is affordable, and then we'll go over these, and then how about if we go over each of these and then take public comment on all three of them, and then we will move on to our next, again, before moving on to 6-3, the equity statement. So we have both the consultants here, and they may wish to be heard on each of these three. I don't know how long these will each be compared to last time, so that's why I think we might do our first round all together. Then have public comment on any and all of the three. The three subcommittees that we have thus far are affordable housing and economic development, schools and youth and policing, or possibly public safety. We have documents under for the housing portion of the affordable housing economic summary, a summary under schools and youth, and a summary under policing. Do we have, so first go around, how about if we have just a statement by anybody on those committees, or if Nicole Anderson or Dr. Shelley Holt want to be heard on the first go round, just wave or give a thumbs up, and we'll bring you in at this stage as well. So you want to go in, you want to start off?
I'll share. I think we'll just wait till everyone gives their update, and then we'll chime in at the end if that's okay.
Okay, if that's
Okay.
what you prefer, that's fine. But
Yeah, I think that's best. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. So any affordable housing and economic development?
Hi, we did not meet prior to this this meeting, so I don't have an update unless I missed something, but I don't have anything from the consultants or Judy as well.
Okay, and I know Commissioner Kerr is not here. Commissioner Marks.
I looked at your notes, Janelle, from your meetings, and one of the questions was how many Section 8 people there are in Albany. And about a year ago, Peggy McQuaid told me that there are 11 Section 8 people who live in Albany. So I think that's valuable information that you guys might need. So I wanted to pass that on.
Now, is that people, individuals that are on Section 8, or is that housing as far as like apartment complex or homes? Is it broken
11
down?
individuals are in Section 8 in Albany.
Okay.
Thank you, Margie.
Thank you,
This
Mark.
was as of about a year ago. That's when Peggy told me.
Okay.
So it might have changed. That I don't know.
And then we have, and we'll do just our preliminary updates, then take on all three, then take public comment. Another one is schools and youth. Do we have an update from either of our subcommittee members? Commissioner Grossman?
I'm not sure which one of us wants to go first. I'll weigh in.
I think Margie is endorsing you going first, if I'm reading
All right.
right.
I don't want to make assumptions about that. So, okay. So our focus really is on the youth voice in Albany and on action to support youth. We have a meeting coming up on the 22nd. We had a second meeting with the president of the board and the superintendent of ASUD, and had a good conversation. We seem to be very much on the same page in terms of wanting to bring to bear the voice of youth. The schools are working on developing a group that will work on questions of gaps in performance, and it's possible that the city can be involved with that process. So we do have a meeting coming up with a group of students to talk about their experience in the city, what issues they are seeing in terms of race, what needs they have, and how those needs might be met. So that would be our first data collection effort. We plan to have several of these kind of more informal collections, and then we will also work on a youth survey. And maybe Margie would like to talk about what we've learned about the youth task force that was back in the 90s in the city. So why don't we let that happen now?
Okay. So in December of 1995, the city council appointed a youth task force, and that task force was made up of members of, and I'm going to read off the different organizations because there were a lot of them in the city: Drug and Alcohol Prevention, Solano Avenue Association, Albany Teen Center, Police Activities League, UC Village Recreation, Albany Y, Libraries, Friendship Club, PTA, the school district, the Chamber of Commerce, and teen representatives. So those were the people, and I got this information from Peggy McQuaid, who knows all the Albany history, luckily for us, but Peggy told me it wasn't a group where the same people came to every meeting. I guess people came in and out. So what this task force was tasked with doing was doing a youth master plan for Albany. So Peggy was on the task force just from 2006 to 2010. And then after they did the plan, they were disbanded. So I just want you to know, we have this youth master plan in Albany now. It's like about 50 pages. And I want to talk about, I just want to talk about main issues raised that I think are still very alive today. And are very interesting. The first one was a lack of local newspaper or communications or media that we have in the city. And this kind of goes along with that: a single clearinghouse for all activities and services. Lack of pre-teen teen activities like a cafe, a club, a place to hang, to play pool, to listen to music. And from time to time, the city has had teen centers or clubs or cafes. We've named them different things, but we did have a teen center for middle school students that was in the senior center annex, and then it got moved to be part of the Friendship Club, which is the elementary school aftercare program. And I understand that the enrollment went way down. That was in 2019. So affordable childcare and resources for conflict resolution. And looking at these stuff, at one time, there was a youth court in Albany, but we don't have it anymore. So that's worth looking into. But I just think it's really interesting that these issues are coming up. I mean, it's like we really need to do something to fix these issues so that they're not coming up. And so when we do our reports, hopefully 10 years later, people aren't looking and say, gee, we didn't even know that existed in Albany, because I didn't know that Albany had a youth master plan. And a lot of, anyway, that's, so I've tried to pull out what I think are the pertinent parts out of it. So thank you.
So if I can,
Please.
yeah, so and we'll share that with you, but very little of what's in the youth action plan ever got done. And most of what got done sort of has disappeared subsequently. So we really need to start from scratch. And one of the things we've been talking about and talked about with schools a little bit is the possibility of some kind of a youth advisory commission for the city, so that there is an ongoing voice of youth represented in the city. And also one of the things that's become rather clear is the communication between the city and the school district is not very good and not very effective. There's information on the city website about the schools. It's inaccurate. The events in the schools really don't get communicated through the city website. So all of these, I think, things represent a kind of a disconnect. There are the 2x2x2 meetings, but it doesn't seem like much else is going on. And one of the things that's clear to us is that the schools are eager to work with the city. But there doesn't seem to be a good connection.
So could I just say, Bart and I are planning on having a meeting with Dr. Tutane, who's the Board of Education president, and Dr. Wells, the school superintendent with the city manager and the mayor to talk about communication issues, because we think there's some things that we could maybe take care of, like, like this. That's what I think, but lots of times I'm wrong about that. But anyway, so that's going to be happening.
And we would like you guys to support us in making that recommendation that such a meeting be held.
Mhm.
Um,
Is that a resolution request, or you just want our informal support, or this will be down the road, or?
Well, I suppose it would be good to have it be a motion so that we can say to the council that everyone's behind doing this.
Okay. Commissioner Gary, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Thank you, Commissioner Grossman and Commissioner Marks. I appreciate the update, and I definitely will support that. I think it is important, especially now that we unite and bring our youth and city government together. So I'm 100% supporting having such meeting.
Thank you. All right, so we can move now. We'll come back to each of these, but in our first round to the final of the subcommittees on policing or public safety.
Wait, do you want public comment?
I said I'd do all three of them, and then the first round, and then public comment on all three of them, if that's okay. But I appreciate the reminder. So very briefly on policing and public safety, we met on September 14th, and meeting notes with Ms. Anderson and Dr. Holt, as well as with the city manager and the city police chief. We aim to have a dialogue, including both SEJC members, consultants, or a trilogue, however we'd say that, consultants and city staff. To talk about history and experience of public safety in Albany, perceptions of public safety, and ways of articulating common goals, of being responsive to the community, and of discerning what the community's feelings, needs are, and of being responsive to the perceptions of inequity in this department and in other neighboring departments, and of how to address those. In that context, we didn't come to resolution on these, but laid out some different types of questions, some of which are from the meeting, some of which I think were added afterwards on the report, and which are included there. And I think a key question for the subcommittee, which I won't try and resolve here without Commissioner Kerr, but is whether the best next steps for the subcommittee involve continuing to have these kind of larger groups, or which are very valuable, or to have some meetings that are just the two subcommittee members, and then to seek to return back to the larger group at another point. So we do not yet have an October meeting scheduled, in part to figure out that question of how to go forward, but hope to do so soon. Nicole, do you want to be heard before public comment, or do you want to take public comment and then be heard?
I'm fine with public comment, and then we can kind of wrap it up, because we have a couple of things, I think, in this agenda item. So I'm fine with public comment for that piece.
All right, so we'll take public comment. Now we're on item 6.2. Which is composed of discussion of all three subcommittees. Any member of the public who'd like to be heard on any of the above subcommittees, affordable housing, economic development being one, schools and youth being a second, policing, public safety being a third, please raise your hand and we'll recognize you. If there's no one who would like to be heard, I see two participants with the hand raised, and I think the staff is bringing in Jeremiah. So you're in, Jeremiah Pinguela.
Well, now I get to speak, and I'm already 5 seconds short, but thanks. And also, you want me to get 3 minutes to speak on 3 different agenda items? You should allow the public to speak for 3 minutes per agenda item. So now what? Now you want to give me 1 minute per each? And they're all about different things. So that's not very socially justice right there. You kept denying public comment on each agenda item. What's up with that? Well, I'll tell you what. I have some questions maybe you can answer. It's all about affordable housing. What is affordable? what's affordable? Maybe different than other people, right? So what is affordable to you may not be affordable to someone else. Also, if there is affordable housing, what's the income cap? Is there a monthly income cap? And what is it? Is it $2,000? I mean, you need to disclose this information and be fully transparent. You can't just say, oh, affordable housing. Nobody knows what that means. It's so vague. Get down to the details. You make $2,500 a month. What's your income, right? So I'll tell you what, the most affordable housing is free housing. See, this is the city's agenda, affordable housing, because free housing isn't on there because the city can't make taxes. So I'll tell you what's to stop me from buying an RV tomorrow, parking it in front of the city hall, fully registered, fully insured. It's a legal car on a state highway. What's wrong with that? Oh, but you want to create a law or create a municipal code to where affordable housing and a certain class, well, this is all people could afford is an RV, to put a roof over their head. That's all they could afford. But the city wants to create a municipal code or a law to say RVs are not allowed within the city limits. Your type of affordable housing is not accepted in our community within our city limits. That's so wrong. It is so discriminating against the lowest class. You know, you just want to just feel good about yourselves, not anybody on this committee personally. It's just, we got to fix this, you know, and the municipal code is wrong. Like the sign, it says your vehicle could be 72 feet tall. Okay. The inches and the feet sign, the little dashes are wrong. So the whole municipal code's wrong. There's errors in the writing, you know? So we got to fix this. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I think the city clerk is bringing in another person with the hand up. Let me see. Julie Winkelstein.
That's spelled D-A-V-I-D, Julie Winkelstein. I just wanted to say that I agree with Jeremiah. I don't know if we need 3 minutes for each one, but I do think that cramming all of these huge topics into 3 minutes is a challenge. So I'm just going to talk about the police one. And it's such a gigantic issue. And I feel like these meetings that you have where it's just two people talking and then I'm reading notes afterwards, there's just so much to be covered. We're talking about racism, we're talking about systemic racism, we're talking about the history of policing in the United States going back to the slave times. We're talking about the kind of the assumptions that are made by police officers. We're talking about the assumptions that are made by the public, by the community, when they should call the police, why they won't call the police, what they're afraid of. There's just so much. And just in the last week, I've attended 3 different webinars addressing policing. There's one today, I think it was, with Ta-Nehisi Coates. Then there was one put on by UC Berkeley that was all about, it was called Reforming the Criminal Justice System, New Perspectives from the Berkeley Center for the Study of Law and Society. There's all these great webinars. I would like to think that the police officers are watching these, being assigned to watch these, that there's discussions going on. And I would like to see your two people groups be instead where the public could come and ask questions, answer other questions, talk about what they're feeling. It's just, you know how many books have just come out in the last year about this topic, and the idea that 2 of you are sitting around talking about it and then reporting, and then we get to talk for 3 minutes just doesn't make any sense. And I think that these meetings that you had where you brought in the public, although I have a lot of concerns about how not well distributed the information was, so I think you would have had a lot more people from the public, were a good start. And that's what we need. We don't need the 2 of you talking and then reporting. And I appreciate the work that you've done, and I appreciate your comments, and I appreciate the way you are. But this is an issue that is affecting everyone in the United States right now. With the virus, you know, we're seeing Black and brown communities being hit hard. none of this is getting to be talked about. And I think that must be another way of approaching this so that the entire community could be engaged in this really, really important work. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. At this point, I don't see any other public hands raised. So we'll move back to discussion among the commission, and we'll hear from Nicole Anderson and Dr. Holt. But Commissioner Marks, did you want to be heard first?
I just wanted to say something really quickly, but I can't remember what it was. So it must not have been important. Sorry.
We'll come back to you. Thank you.
Yeah, come back to me.
All right. Ms. Anderson, do you want to talk about the subcommittee process more broadly, or anything else that you and Dr. Holt want to talk to us about?
Sure. And I think actually this would be great if we enter now and then maybe some discussion happen even after, because I think there's also feedback we'd like to get from you all. So that might be a great, with public comment and also some of the things we share. So I want to acknowledge, again, just the group being here present tonight and addressing something that I've heard echoed so much as one of the most important topics we could address in the community, which is addressing institutional racism. And I want to remind us in the community of why we're here, right, as a collective group, that there have been issues that have been plaguing our communities for hundreds of years. And I think one of the things that is really important to think about this type of work, it's like none other. It is not something that is easy to do. It requires some very strategic approaches to this, and it requires what we call a systems approach. And so one of the things that's interesting as we kind of pause, I call it a pause, and we have information now. We've started this work, but now we're having this feeling of where do we go from here? And so I want to just kind of pause and have us reflect on where have we come and where do we need to go, but recognize that this is a journey. And just the ability for this group and the community to be safe to talk about racism, let alone do something about racism, is a huge task that I want to say many cities around the nation are wrestling with. And so I want to remind you of that this is not just easy work like any other work that the city's ever taken on. This is new, this is historical. And I want to remind us of that, because some of our struggle right now, I think in this work, is kind of hearing comments in the past, but also knowing what's going to come as we continue to unpack the work, is that it's going to be tough, but we want to remember this is a journey. So I want to share a few things to think about, specifically your subcommittee work, which is really critical. And I think vital for your commission to really have a collective view on this issue around institutional racism from your different focal points, but also as a collective. What is that issue? What does it really mean to address institutional racism and make a recommendation, again, to City Council, which is a huge step in itself. And so I'm going to share just a few slides. Some of these actually you've seen before, and some of them are a little newer. I know Isabel has them, and I apologize I didn't send them to you ahead of time. I sometimes forget your process, but you all have access to these, will have access. So I want to remind you of a few things before I share that work that the subcommittee has done, because just to do subcommittee work requires a level of safety, right? A level of feeling like I have a place to do this work, that I'm not going to be judged. I'm not going to feel like I'm going to be attacked or told I'm wrong, but that I have a place in this work to even begin to unpack racism. And remember, this is an ongoing journey in itself for the city of Albany. I don't want us to forget this step. This step cannot be missed in the process. That if people don't feel safe to do this work, then the brave space we need to do this work will never happen in terms of changing policies and practices that have been rooted in institutional racism. And so we're calling out things like policing, which is very uncomfortable to talk about. Historically, it is uncomfortable to talk about because it's coupled with racism hundreds of years ago. So we have to recognize that. Calling out housing, understanding that discrimination and segregation, all those things that have impacted communities of color, all of these things literally have historical roots. So when we start unearthing those, it becomes very uncomfortable because sometimes we don't even know what it looks like, because these have been historical policies and practices that have disadvantaged groups of people for hundreds of years. So I want to acknowledge why this work will be hard, because we have to continue to create safety, but I also want to remind us about the discomfort that will happen. And these 4 agreements are reminders as a community that we're going to stay engaged together, even when it's uncomfortable, that we're going to continue to be okay with discomfort. And that's each stakeholder who is listening, who will listen to this work and be engaged in this work. Is important. We all recognize that we have to experience discomfort for us to grow. And that means that when people speak their truth, which is what happens often, right? We ask people to speak their truth. We're going to collect data from the community. We're going to hear those voices. When people speak their truth, it's important we recognize that everyone's truth is not going to be the same. And that in itself creates discomfort. Again, we're trying to unpack institutional racism. That in itself is uncomfortable, but we have to be okay with experiencing discomfort to grow. Last but not least is that expect and accept non-closure. And this is always the great reminder for SEJC in itself, because you all have lots of passion, right? You have focal points. You've been doing this work for a while. This is not new. When Dr. Holt and I came to work with you, you all have been doing this work and you're passionate about it. You have intentionality. You have very clear focus areas, but also there's a little bit of the non-closure because sometimes we want it to go fast. And then sometimes we want to do things that we're just, maybe there's not a readiness. And so I just want to remind us again, that before we go into the subcommittee work and just kind of talking about the equity impact plans, the racial equity statement, that we remember our process. And our process is about creating safety so everybody can engage in this work. And as equity leaders and racial equity leaders, I want to call you out as SEJC, but also anyone in the community who calls yourself an equity leader, equity warrior, social justice warrior, whatever you identify as someone who is passionate about this work and you absolutely are committed for a lifetime to this work. I want to remind you that we have to meet people where they are. And everybody is not on the same journey. And so it's going to require us to be strategic. It's going to require us to create safety for everybody to engage. That means trust has to be built. That means relationships have to be cultivated. And that takes time. So I want to say that because I also see that this work is actually, you're making progress in this area. When we first met you, we didn't have these agreements established. And so I just want to say that because I want to commend you on the work you've been doing. The subcommittee work, while it's 2 people, obviously, because of the Brown Act, so they can't have anyone else come in. It's not a public meeting, but there has been engagement with some community members in small spaces. I want to commend you on some of the work you've done and want to have an opportunity to really kind of celebrate with you and just remind you of the progress you've made thus far, even through this SEJC work as a whole, but also as a subcommittee. And so the way I want you to think about it is Dr. Holt and I have been pushing you all to think about approaching this work with a systems lens. Okay, so that this work will last beyond just this year, beyond people terming out. We want this work to last. We have a 10-year goal, and that 10-year goal, we can reach that in 10 years, we will have made systemic change. So I want you to kind of see where the celebration has to come and what we call celebrating small wins. Okay, so with your subcommittee work, with your whole kind of SEJC work, I want you to see some of the celebrations that we want to capitalize on and moving forward, and also see where we need to continue to work at. So I broke them up into mental models, relationships, power dynamics, resource shift, practice change, and policy change, because those are the 6 levels in 6 conditions in a system that have to be addressed in order to see systemic change. So they all kind of intersect together. So we can't do one without another. So while many of us are super excited about policy change, like let's change policing practices and policies, and let's change housing policies, the reality is that we have to make sure people believe in that we have positive relationships with those that impact those decisions, and that ultimately people who have the least voice in this are empowered to be a part of this work. And that's called power dynamics, including the community, hearing from others. Is going to be important. We talk about the power shifts that need to happen when we're trying to address institutional racism, which again, power plays a huge role in this. So I want to just celebrate a couple of things to remind you, SEJC, of some of the work you've done. One, in the mental model space. This is where we talk about people's narrative belief systems, that you have been having courageous conversations about race, which is not a normal culture in Albany. And I say normal culture, meaning being intentional about it. Right. And so while that's a celebration, we know we got work to do, but that has been happening. We've had subcommittee work in itself where you've had intentional focus on trying to really approach this as a systems issue, that you're starting to unpack what is causing this to be in place. What data do we need? That's a celebration because that helps us have a better sense of what we're actually dealing with. It helps us understand what belief systems we have to address for others who may not know what the actual problem is. Because remember, everyone's not going to believe in this work. I'm going to say that again. Everyone is not going to believe in interrupting institutional racism. This is a huge part of the work, and I cannot emphasize that enough. Unpacking the concepts of around racial equity. So we've been talking about spending more time educating the community, actually educating ourselves, really understanding what does this look like. And so this is something that has been able to move the work forward and given us more context. And you got to celebrate that. This is something we haven't collectively done on a political level, in a governance structure. This is a big deal. I want to mention the relationships. I want to give kudos again to the Education Committee in terms of new partnerships. That's exciting. That's historical. That is something to be celebrated. And again, how do we interrupt institutional racism? You start with those that are going to learn it at young ages. Those call our young people. They learn these things from us as adults. So when you see Instagram incidents, when you see kids who have racially motivated behavior, you got to start with, where did that come from? That came not, I don't even want to say blame parents. I want to talk about when we were young, we learned these things as young children, as infants, about implicit bias. How do we learn how to treat people differently based on race? We learned that as kids. And guess where we learn it? We spend lots of time where? In schools. So I want to remind us that this committee, in having that partnership be bridged, that's huge. And we got to celebrate that, because this is where we'll be able to interrupt when we bring those student voices together, when we have our city leadership and our district leadership come together as two institutions that absolutely can collectively interrupt. That's huge. And I hope that you see that as a celebration from this, not only the subcommittee, but from this collective group as SEJC. The staff and SEJC collaboration through the subcommittee work. You've actually begun to have conversations with staff who actually will be impacted by the racial equity impact plan that goes to city council. Who gets to implement that plan? A lot of that falls on the staff. So what we have to talk about is those relationships, which having these dialogues, just talking about what we don't know, that is a step forward in allowing us to really recognize what relationships are starting to be cultivated, but we still have work to do. But having ourselves at the table with staff is a big piece of this work. So I want to remind you of that and hope you see that as a celebration. The power dynamics. We held one community dialogue, and I do hope we hold more community dialogue, because that's an opportunity to allow the community to be heard and we listen. Again, be heard and we listen. And I say we, meaning power structures, right? Those of us that have power to influence change, we need to listen to those that don't have that power and be okay with the discomfort sometimes when the community calls us out. The input on racial equity is a big piece in terms of city council empowering SEJC to give input on racial equity, to say, hey, I want you to come up with a racial equity plan that you recommend to us. That is a power dynamic shift. And I want to make sure we recognize that this is a great opportunity to be able to influence change by using this platform to do so. So that's a big celebration in terms of having that task to come up with this plan. The resource shifts. You all have had a chance to give your agenda time. That is a resource that you have allocated time for, not only subcommittee work, but also to put racial equity on the agenda at the city council level, at the SEJC level, and really now at the school district level, right? Collaborating with them. That is time that we have given to this work, which is so needed. Staffing time. I know that Albany staff has spent lots of time. So I want to acknowledge Isabel and Sid and everyone who has been a part of, trying to, what I call herd the cats, right? Keeping us all together, making sure this work happens. That's big. And that's time that's been allocated to this work, and that has to be celebrated. Of course, the funding, right? There's funding that is associated with staff and their time, obviously funding associated with us as consultants. But this is really about, we have shifted our resources to really start seeing what can we do different. That's a big plus. And yes, we have a ways to go, but absolutely that's a huge plus. Practice and policy change. We're still working on that, but I want you to see the celebration is that you are now examining intentionally ways to communicate better, right? Ways to outreach to our community better, because we've heard public comment, we've heard people say, look, we got to communicate more clearly to make sure this work is known to the community. And also we got to outreach to even hear their voices. So that's a really important piece of this work. And of course, examining those practices in those subcommittee areas. Housing, we're examining what those housing practices are. There's great questions that's come up from the community that we still have to unpack. The practices of the police department, that comes up. It's going to be so many things that will come up in terms of education. What are the practices of educators? What are the practices of the community at large? When we talk about educating the community on the role of implicit bias, when we talk about how people are treated differently within the community, these are all things that are under examination right now, which has not always been the case. So that's a celebration, because we're being intentional about calling out the issues in ways that institutional racism has impacted you. And the last piece is the policy change. This is a big part of the structure that when you look at the history of racism, the reality is this, in any institution where oppression plays a role, by the way, it's about policies, right? Those are those written policies. And I have to say also the unwritten policies that actually impact how people do business and who gets disadvantaged and who benefits. And that happens in all industries and all sectors, but I want to specifically remember that this group has been tasked to call out race, and that's why I keep saying racial equity, because that's what you've been tasked to talk about, and knowing that there is some intersectionality that happens with people. But specifically leveraging your committee work, the police task force, those are all spaces literally where you are examining policy for potential change. And that in itself, you should celebrate. So I just want to say that as we go into, really looking at what your subcommittees can continue to do in this work, because as consultants, one of the things we've been excited about is we spent quite a number of hours. I know we don't have extensive time and unlimited time, but in the time we've spent thus far, there have been some great progress that has been made. And we want to remind you of that, because I think sometimes it's hard to see when we're in the thick of things and it's like, what is different that we've done? But we've really begun to start those conversations. And again, those mental models are starting to change and the relationships are being cultivated. And the reality is that your subcommittee work is going to be critical to move this work forward. So I want to say that again, your subcommittee work is going to be critical to move this work forward. And so as you move it forward, we're excited that we feel your capacity and kind of your insight on the topics that you focus on are really critical to continue to build your racial equity impact plan. And we want you to really continue to think about a couple of things as you move forward as subcommittees in terms of two kind of big bullets. So one is your racial equity impact planning. That has to continue. As we speak, you are building your plan, by the way. We've been collecting historical data, which is part of your plan. We have to have a background to know where we're going. You have begun to talk about your racial equity statement. Those are all part of this racial equity impact planning. You've identified focus areas. So your planning is happening as we speak. And so in your work ahead with subcommittees, we want to continue to encourage you to do that. And we also want to continue to think about in your subcommittee work that you continue to try to have at least a monthly touch point so that you can advance the work. And some of you may have more. I know Margie and Bart have a couple of things on the agenda because of the school district hosting some things. So your touch points may be more often than others. But I want you to continue to think about what do those monthly meetings look like. And there's some big things that have to happen. Developing your racial equity statement is going to be important. We're going to unpack that in another agenda item today, so I won't go deep into that. Developing the survey. So there's still some data that the community needs to be involved in. And survey is one form of data that we want to collect. So I want to say that, but there's lots of other ways to do that. And so we're going to talk about how that survey will look and really support you in terms of how your subcommittees can continue to develop what questions to ask and really stay laser focused on the focus areas that you currently have. The community listening sessions, I think those need to continue, or dialogues, I should say, and continuing to collect community voice. So that's going to be important. I know Margie and Bart have a date with a group of folks from called Young People in Albany, I think October 22nd. That's a great way to collect student voice, community voice. So that's examples how that work can continue through the subcommittees in your long-term work in building this plan. And then of course, the big pieces are going to be continuing to analyze the data. So as you get more information, then you'll be able to make better recommendations to City Council. And we still have a long way to go. There is a lot of information to collect. And the reality is you're going to have to analyze that to really inform the work around what do you recommend to council. And then, of course, providing them some updates. So I think it's important when we talk about communication that the council stay abreast of what you're doing and that there's some clear reporting that really helps them see kind of the big picture. Where are we going with it? So those interim updates are going to be important that the subcommittees continue to provide kind of from this collective voice of the SEJC. So I want to make sure that I had a chance to just kind of share that with you and ensure that you see the big picture. Some of the work as, and I think about moving forward, obviously SEJC is one of many entities in this work. You also have the staff who's part of this work. You have your police department as part of this work. You have your city council as part of this work. And so these collective spaces, us as consultants are going to continue to support the work and want to make sure that we really utilize our time as effective as possible So we'll shift a couple of spaces where you may not see us in the subcommittee space as often in the next couple of months, but definitely we'll continue to work with you to ensure that we give you some maybe provide some recommendations, but at least give you some context on how that could look as you move your work forward. So I wanted to share that and make sure that you really have a good sense of where we're going. And then we'll talk about the plan in terms of some of the details. You've already seen this slide. This is what the components of the plan. We'll spend some time continuing to help you build your plan. So that's moving forward. The work is still the same, but we do want to make sure we understand as we pause and think about where we are, that you've made some great progress, but we have a long way to go. And the subcommittee work is going to be really critical, but also we will be in collaboration with the staff and obviously City Council to really hear kind of what's the best way to support all of this collective work around addressing racism in Albany. So I want to share that just to give context for the subcommittee. And if there's any questions or discussion, this is definitely time. I'm not sure if Dr. Holt wanted to jump in because I can't even see everyone. I think I'm going to stop sharing and I can see you all. How about that? So not sure if Dr. Holt wanted to jump in before the commission has any questions or discussion.
The only thing I was going to add was just the understanding that this survey is going to be that mechanism where we're going to be able to gather that community input. And as we know, that is a very critical part of this process. And so as we continue this work, I just want to echo that we are still in the background helping to ensure that the survey gets the entire community involved on multiple levels with these very important issues, and that we are able to identify what issues are important to the community. Yeah. Because these established committees that existed may or may not, and that's what we're hearing more of, cover the magnitude of the issues that we just want to at least get on paper and it developed into the plan so that we truly don't leave critical components or equity gaps that have yet to be identified out. So I look forward to working with all of you on that.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, great point. And Dr. Holt, what I'll do just before they start to share is there was one slide I did not show you just to give you a reminder of some of the work you've already started. And I know some people commented on from public comment about, the process. And so I just want to remind everyone about your actual work, that your agendas really should remain the same. Like nothing really changes. You're just deepening the work. So all of these things we're sharing is part of what we were doing anyway. So we think that you really can continue. And the main piece that you see at the bottom, those action items, is continuing to focus on your goals, continuing to identify those challenges, continuing to collect data. But these are all the things that show up in those meeting summaries that the public sees. So I just want to give context to that so they saw that the meeting summary kind of comes from this conversation, and each one looks a little different depending on some of the specific agenda items based on bringing people to the table, the staff coming, having collaboration with the education community. So it may look a little different, but just to give the community a sense of these are some of the ways the agendas are kind of crafted in terms of the outcomes, the purpose, but the meeting action item, which we recommend you continue on that same path, and we'll definitely be open to give some recommendations and guidance for that. So I just wanted to share that piece as well. So that's it, Chair Downs. We'll yield to questions and discussion.
All right, thank you so much, both of you, for all of that and for all of your work. And, just to make sure I understand your framework going forward, that there will be times where the subcommittees will meet, on their own, in engagement with you and Dr. Holt. But while you worked with them at, almost every meeting as they got going, that now, like some of our other SEJC subcommittees, your expectation is you'll be in communication with them, but that, that they should feel empowered to meet on their own so that their meeting schedule is not tied to yours and Dr. Holt's. Is that right?
Absolutely. But we're here. We're here anytime for thought partnership, definitely resources. So we'll still be able to weigh in anytime. So not a problem.
So I think we all, that's good that we all have that understanding and expectation. So general comments on all of the subcommittee questions and on anything that relates. Commissioner Grossman.
Yeah, I'm feeling that it's very important that we move forward now with the survey. I think there's a danger that if we don't do that, we're going to find that we're spinning our wheels. Because our job at this, I mean, we've all had our subcommittees, we've all clarified what our domain is. Our job now is to collect data, analyze that data, and to make recommendations. And until we move on that, it's very hard to know what we're meeting about at this point. And the danger is that we can also start intervening before we've even defined what we need to intervene about, because we don't know what else to do. So, I mean, I'm trying to be very clear, to be specifically in terms of the education program, that these meetings we're having are about collecting data. They're not about beginning to move on things. You know, we don't have, that's not our remit. Our remit is really to collect data and make recommendations. So until we do that, it's when we make presentations to the council, when we make presentations here, it's naturally going to seem vague because we don't have any data. We don't have anything to look at. We don't have anything really to present at this point. So I just want to say we need to get on with that, I think.
Yeah. What do you see as the steps to go? I mean, I share that completely. The steps to turn that from an aspiration to something that's launched.
So is that a question for me?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes,
for all of us,
thing,
but yes,
yeah.
for you and Dr. Holt, sure.
So one of the things I want to remind you all of is that part of the next steps I mentioned that we're going to talk about in your next agenda item is defining what racial equity is. Like, what does this look like moving forward? And part of your survey conversations, part of your questions have to be in the context of racial equity. So it's important that you have kind of this parallel happen at the same time, that we continue to evolve. What does it mean when we say racial equity? So that when you ask the community for feedback, that you're actually getting the data you need to make recommendations. So I agree with Member Grossman in regards to we need to get this survey. And I think that was what I was saying earlier about that is a great next step in terms of your agendas for your subcommittee work, is to really develop what that survey is. But remember, the survey was designed to be a community survey, meaning that you have portions of that are policing, that's what we talked about originally, youth, we talked about housing, we talked about business development, so that you have components of that. But then you also have this big piece around what does racial equity even mean to you? Because I think what will happen is without having that information and without really having a focal point, you'll actually ask the wrong questions, and we'll do it based on our assumptions. And then the data you get back actually won't inform your work. So that's why we strategically didn't push the survey first, because we want to have context for what are we asking for, and some of the feedback you got from the community, even around when we did the policing work group, and we were coming up with the demographics on the application. That dialogue about how people even identify is important, that we had that discussion, because we are making assumptions about what we think we want to ask people and what we think people may want. And even as Dr. Shelley said, is that the reality is even our focus areas may not be what the community wants. It could be that what comes up is, you know what, racial equity to me is that when I drive through Albany as an African-American woman, I can't find that many soul food places that really I connect with. Now that's me having a personal opinion, right? And that's me also wishing that I live down south in the southern states where there's an abundance of soul food, right? So that's me talking in that space. Living in California where soul food as African-American is not something that's readily available. But I also go to Albany because there are some good soul food places. I want to say that they exist. But without you knowing what racial equity is and making sure that we don't have in a box who we're even outreaching to, then our survey actually kind of, it undermines and we won't get the best data. I want to also remind you, your survey was designed to be given in a long term, right, for trend data. So even though we're going to have a survey now, you want to be able to give it next year, and the year after, and the year after, so you have trend data. So coming up with a survey, you want to be really careful and strategic about how you do that, because once you put it out there, you don't want to change it, right? Because then it's going to skew the data. You want to have something real concrete. So we absolutely, Bart, we want to say definitely that is a great use of subcommittee time. And I would say in these next few months, you absolutely want to get to a place of a draft survey that you can say, hey, it's time to get it out and let's collaborate with the staff on how that looks. because there's a lot that goes with that in terms of getting it out, collecting the data, who's going to analyze it. There's more to it. So we want to make sure we're really strategic in that process. So I concur with you, but I just want to give that, that context of absolutely, that's a great use of your time moving forward. And you all actually with the Education Committee, by the way, we definitely need to talk, I think, between now and when you have that October 22nd meeting, because when you do the student forum, there are specific questions that you want to make sure you ask, because that's data that is going to be collected outside of a survey, right? That's an actual, we call interview. It's a whole different collection of data. So absolutely, you're onto it. We just want to make sure everybody's on the same page so that we don't roll it out and it not be effective in terms of the data you want to get in the long run. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yes.
Okay, good, because I'm happy you brought it up. Yeah.
So it seems like some of this we can return to in our next agenda item, the equity statement.
Yeah.
And especially the point you made about making sure that the questions are tied to that. Does it make sense in terms of shifting from 6.2 to 6.3 that the subcommittees make it a goal to be in the October working on developing drafts of survey questions and can communicate with the consultants about that, and then can communicate with us at our November meeting. Does that seem like a reasonable way of wrapping up where we are now on the subcommittees? Thank you. And so that moves us into 6.3, the equity statement. So Ms. Anderson started speaking about this. We'll let her turn it back over to her to remind us about some of the things that she's, whatever she wants, but she's spoken to us prior about the nature of an equity statement. And its relationship to what we would survey about. Then we will have any opening statements by commissioners, and then we'll take any public comment and then come back for more discussion if that works. So Ms. Anderson, do you want to talk about equity statement? You already started on.
Yeah, perfect segue. So I want to just, kind of go back to that conversation that I started off, and there was a reason why I mentioned safe space is important to do this work. And so I want you to remember why that conversation is important, because it's going to tie to this particular slide that you all have seen, by the way. So some of these are just a repeat of what you've seen before, but I want to just remind you about kind of what goes into creating this racial equity statement and why it's important to even have one. And so if you remember, I talked about safety. And as we continue to unpack this work, what's happening is you are in the process of recognizing institutional racism and the things that have been holding these policies and practices in place, but also we're in this process of responding, right? And so there's two different things going on right now. There's recognizing and responding. And so it's important that I share these images because I want to make sure it's really clear and that we see it in action, is that we are in a space where this work is not going to be easy, but we also are in a space where there is a great opportunity right now. There's lots of energy, and this is a great moment in time to engage in this work. And I want to remind you of that and kind of, follow me as we go into why we need a racial equity statement, because you notice again, those images on the left side of the screen are really centered around, there is great collaboration and solidarity and real, like energy I've never seen before. And I think many of you will say, we've never seen this type of energy in our lifetime in many spaces. And a lot of it is around being really intentional about addressing institutional racism and calling it out. So that's a good thing. Now there's also the other side, on the right side, is what we call the emotions attached to this work when everyone doesn't necessarily feel like they want to address this work in the same way. And we have to recognize this, that everyone doesn't necessarily understand why we need to change policies and practices, or understand that people have been disadvantaged for years and years and years. There are going to be folks that are going to say, I don't believe there's racism. Tell me how. Do you mean there's policies that are in place that just are disadvantaging this group of people based on their racial kind of identity? Or is it because, literally you'll have questions that come up. And so this is going to be important, because the emotions behind this work and not having a collective understanding is that there's things like rage, which some may equate to anger, resistance. There's fear, right? Lack of understanding. I'm fearful I may lose something. Or how about this? I'm just fearful that I don't know how to talk about race. So I'm just not going to deal with it at all. And so as you see historically and also currently, these same things are going on. So I want to make sure you understand why we have to have an actual definition or statement about what racial equity is, because collectively we all have to have the same understanding, and we may not all agree. So I want to make sure we understand that we may not all agree, but we do have to have an understanding what it is. And as SCJC, this is something we have to remember is part of our role in terms of us collectively as a commission, and collectively to be able to go to city council and help them understand, here's what we recommend around our racial impact plan, but we have to actually identify what does it mean and make sure it's very crystal clear of why we're doing this work. So I want to remind you of several slides I've shared with you before. These are repeat slides, but I want to bring them up again because part of your work in your subcommittees is to continue to call out, what are we doing? We are unpacking racism. What does it mean? What is race? So you're going to have to make sure we call it out, this social construct that has divided people. We call it artificially because it's actually a social mental construct, but there's actually no real evidence of physical differences between people in terms of their inability to be able to think or to be able to be successful in any spaces because of being inferior based on genetics. And as a matter of fact, when we do our DNA, we have more in common than not. And some people always kind of joke and say, you know, trust me, it's true. I actually did my own DNA. And even though I identify as an African-American woman, guess what? I have 30% of me that is identified as Western European. And so what that tells me is that we have to be really careful about understanding how to do this work outside of the construct of race, which was designed to keep us separated and to keep us in a space of not actually understanding that differences really are based on other things, not based on our skin tone, are based on even our ancestral heritage, because many of us have similar ancestral heritage. And so we have to really continue to unpack that. And that's going to be hard because when we talk about the system, when we talk about racism, that is a system and it maintains supremacy of groups of people who actually identify in what we call white based on the data. But when you go into supremacy, we talk about the power structures. We talk about the social constructs that is important we unpack. And so as you get ready to create your racial equity statement, you got to remember the construct of race is that the reality is we're going to have to continuously work with the community and educate the community and learn with the community about the history of racism. And this is going to be really difficult because the ultimate reality is that this is a structure in place that has been built to benefit some and not others. And what's going to happen when we start calling out race is people are going to have a struggle with that. And we're going to want to start to talk about the intersectionality of not only race, but gender, but language, all those things that make up who I am. These are all things that are going to come up. So as we talk about this, we have to continuously unpack the construct of race. And I'm giving you literally like the 30-second version of this because of time, but this I cannot say enough. If we're going to address institutional racism, we're going to have to unpack what it is and be really clear about how we're going to work with the community to not only educate, but learn from the community on what their construct of race is and start to push people to think beyond just race, but start looking at ethnicity, right, and culture, which is where we actually have more in common. This is where we start breaking down the ability to see that we are not monolithic. So just the fact that one person marks a box that another person marks, they may have very different needs. So we don't want to make any assumptions in our community based on race, the construct of race, that because of these buckets and demographics, that everybody has the same needs. That in itself is going to be a real tough one because everyone has different needs, and race in itself was designed as a social construct to divide people based on something that actually is not really the reality. So what I'm saying is, in our work, we're going to have to define racial equity to make sure we ensure we're not continuously perpetuating racism, which was designed actually to create the exact opposite of what you all are wanting to do. The other slide that you saw was an example of institutional racism. And I keep using that word quite a bit. And again, that's those policies and those practices that are embedded within and across institutions. Okay, so you all have called out a lot of them: housing and business and policing and education. Those are all institutions that absolutely, unfortunately, have policies and practices embedded in them that are historical. And so we're going to have to recognize those and really start to understand our racial equity statement is about what does it look like if these things weren't in place? What does this look like? So we got to define it so that we really understand where we're going. And that's why that survey data is going to be really critical about the questions we ask. We don't want to perpetuate racism in our survey, in the questions we ask. We want to help deconstruct it and start learning more about people's identity, again, their ethnicity, their culture. Those are the spaces where we actually can be able to deconstruct racism. And that's going to be a hard piece to do when we unfortunately operate in demographics, which were designed to separate people and keep us in boxes. So I want to make sure that's really important that we wrestle with that. Oh, go ahead, Margie, before I go to the next one. Go right ahead.
Okay, I feel like some racism is just someone has an evil heart, but a lot of racism I think is about education. So when you say that part of our role is to educate the community, how do we do that? I mean, I think we should be having public forums or should be doing stuff to educate people. And because I think that is a lot of racism. If people were educated about how we've treated Black people in this country, maybe they would feel differently. But how do we go about educating the public of Albany about this?
Well, I want to say this is the reality is that even us saying, and I should rephrase it of saying us, meaning we have the power and responsibility to educate others, right? That's part of the issue is that we usually have kind of a Eurocentric way, a dominant culture in terms of how things are taught, right? So I think it's more about what you said is listening to the community, right? Around what is, again, their identity, their experience, so that we can deconstruct racism. Because I think many of us, and Albany is very similar to lots of cities, there is a dominant culture. And the dominant culture doesn't necessarily have the same experiences of those who have actually been disenfranchised, those that have been marginalized, and all the ways that we call out oppression. So absolutely, we have to not only educate the community in terms of education, in terms of there are things we don't know, community, we don't know. Help us understand your experience, but also you are part of the community. Right? So you also have to be a part of that education. And when I say educate, meaning the more information we know, the more we have to communicate it out. So this is going to be big in terms of having a racial equity statement, because when you start communicating to the community, this is the work we're doing. You want to make sure the community understands what this means so that we don't cause additional confusion or additional anger and rage that actually starts to get in the way of the work of us coming together when we all have the same understanding. So our next activity we're going to do is real quick activity, and it'll help to kind of unpack that. But Dr. Holt, were you going to jump in and share?
I was, because I just want to make sure that folks understand that, you know, part of the rationale for kind of the shift right now, it's perfectly natural. It's perfectly a normal part of the process. And I know since the beginning, we've talked about trusting the process. But for those that were asking process questions, I just want to kind of put this in a bubble for you. We started out this process really looking at, with the SCJC, about what are these areas and really delving deeper using the water systems change article into what are these areas that we're looking at and what are the root causes that are the kind of thinking, the mental models that are holding these institutions in place. Then we went to talk with staff and get some more information about some questions that we were having about these various areas. And what we realized in that moment is, oh my goodness, you know, SCJC is having a conversation and staff in the city may not be having that same conversation. And so what is so critical about what we're saying right now is not only does the SCJC and the community need to have a common definition of equity, it also needs to be happening within the staff so that as they're having these conversations and wrestling with these issues, they're able to come along and do the work with everyone. And so I just want to continue to point out that we can't leave the city staff out of the equation and allowing them time to walk through their own processes, because some folks have been here for years, some people have been in their positions for decades, and this is definitely a different shift or a different take on how we do business within the city. And so these parallel paths need to occur so that everyone is on the same page with even just something as simple as a definition of racial equity. Because if SCJC and the community have one definition, the city council and maybe the staff have another definition, good luck with that one. And so we all have to be on this journey together, which means that we may be kind of stepping in this way. Okay, this group is going to go, then this group is going to go, then this group is going to go up. This one might take a little bit longer, but that's okay. We're going to keep moving forward And so empathy, grace, and understanding is going to be critical in this process. And this is why you keep hearing us say, go slow to go fast. Because the minute you take off and you leave people behind, you're going to now have many more challenges to deal with. And a lot of it starts with just the language that we use around racial equity. What is race? What is racism? What is institutional racism? Can we at least get on the same page around that and come up with a definition of around these inside and outside of the organization of the city? So I just want to kind of put a bubble around this so that you see, okay, now the next step as we put the surveys out in the community, the staff's going to be learning. And as the staff is learning and then get the information back from the community, now we'll come back together and have some conversations about what can actually happen moving forward and whether or not we have some clear pictures on the real issues.
Yeah, appreciate that, Dr. Holt. And so I want to pause for a minute because I'm going to give you a few examples of what racial equity actually could look like, because ultimately we do have to have common language in SCJC. This is going to be one of your, I think, subcommittee tasks. So I want to see if there's any questions about the concept of race and unpacking race and what, if there's any questions around any discomfort you may have, questions you have around this work, because I know this is something you signed up for. So we're kind of what we call preaching to the choir, if that makes sense. But I want to make sure that if there's any clarity that you need on this, this is obviously doing extensive workshops around unpacking race and racism people do these for years. People get dissertations on these. I mean, this is not something you just unpack in a couple of SCJC meetings, but I want to make sure we stay laser focused on what you were asked to do, and what we were asked to support you in is to address institutional racism in Albany, the city of Albany. So I want to make sure that we have a clear context of that as we get ready to unpack this work. So any questions or thoughts about race, racism? The other slide I shared was institutional racism, just giving you a little bit of context of the work. All right, you're preaching to the choir, Nicole. All right, so what I want to do is give a couple of examples, and then I'm going to ask you actually to give us a sense of how do you as SCJC define racial equity? Okay, so this is an example of a sample of an equity definition. So I'll let you have a moment to take a peek at that one. Again, this is just an example of how one would identify what racial equity is. And there's some examples. As you're reading this definition, I want you, hopefully you've been thinking and wrestling with this concept of person of color coming up a couple of times. Making sure we are able to break down, what does that mean when we talk about racial equity and person of color? I gave a little context about race and then identifying by ethnicity, by culture. But what does it mean, person of color, in this context of racial equity? And again, that's where we have to look at, again, dominant culture typically associated with, when we mark the box white, we have to recognize that structure in terms of systems that benefit based on, again, this person's skin color, also based on those boxes they mark. There's a correlation. And sometimes this looks different depending on what your demographic data looks like. But when you see differences where you can predict and see trends with certain people who mark similar boxes, people of color. And again, you have to deconstruct what that means and why we want to ask the community how they see this as people of color. What does that really mean? But I want to make sure you had an example. Here's one more example. This is what I call sample equity statement. This is actually adapted from the work of National Equity Project, which is right down the street from me in Oakland. They do phenomenal work in supporting people about system change. And really excited about the work they're continuously doing, the impact they've had on my personal professional journey. But just want to acknowledge National Equity Project's a great space where there's lots of resources for the community to think about. But this is another example of a statement, and it actually gives some examples of what it looks like. As you read this particular one, notice it starts to call out interrupting inequitable practices. It calls out eliminating or removing the predictability of success or failure. And those are words they use in their original statement. So I pulled out opportunity, which also speaks about power. So we're calling out power. And marginalization, oppression speaks about, again, the power of people and the lack of power of people. And so this really calls out power right now. Who has the ability to change policies and practices and interrupt the predictability? Because in some spaces, you may be able to predict who is not being served well and who is. Interrupting that. Notice we call out adults and children in this particular statement in a community, because this is big. This is not just about what's best for the adults, but we're talking about a system change, and children have to be a part of that equation. So I really appreciate, again, that you all have called out education and young people. Most critically, I want you to notice that this statement deconstructs like everything about race and kind of throws that out the window and just calls out human beings. How about we start to acknowledge the unique gifts, talents, and interests of every human being versus having racial constructs that if you fit in this box, then your talents are not acknowledged. That if you fit in this box, your gifts aren't acknowledged. Success is based on human talents, gifts, skills, and the opportunity. So this is another example. So here's what I wanted you all to do with SEJC, just to kind of help you see where you can go with this development of a racial equity statement. This is a big piece of your equity impact plan that the city council should see and understand, and that they should also consider as they consider adoption of what does racial equity mean in the city of Albany. So here is something I want you to be thinking about as you continue to do this work. Again, this is a journey. So tonight, this is not about let's come up with a statement tonight. So I want to make sure you all are thinking about that, because I know it's getting late and I don't want your brains to be thinking that you have to come up with a statement tonight. However, part of your subcommittee work is going to require what we call the elephant and blind man kind of activity to happen. And also the work you're going to be doing with the community to ensure that they share their perspective on what racial equity is, because we cannot assume that we know. We are going to also call out our own ability to have power and influence and say, we don't necessarily know. We are like the elephant and the blind man, that we're feeling around trying to figure out what racial equity means. And the reality is we all have different perspectives. And this is going to be a real struggle for the commission, but also for the community. And we have to understand going into this, that this is going to be messy, but what is going to be important is that everyone's perspective matters. For those elephant, the blind man touching the elephant, all their perspectives were right. Is one of them saying, hey, the tail is a rope? Well, he's right. That's his perspective. But he's wrong because it's an elephant. It's the tail. Okay, this is going to happen with this type of work, that people are going to want to start to call out race and start talking about people's gender. They're going to want to start to call out people's language, because a lot of times those correlate, racial oppression correlates with other aspects of people's identity. But in this space, we're calling out race. So the elephant is the issue around race. And that's where we have to deconstruct even the elephant, understanding that everyone has different needs. And the reality is that even though this one group might identify with the same racial box, the reality is that they have different needs. So even that's going to be a tough one to unpack when we make assumptions about what everyone needs. So this piece here, Dr. Holt, I'm going to let you kind of walk them through this, but this is a really, I call it fun activity, but also very complex, because we're going to ask you to be thinking about how you're going to come together as 5 people to make a recommendation down the road. And so there's no decision tonight, there's no action, anything like that, but this is a discussion discussion about what racial equity might mean to you as we try to move forward. So Dr. Hall, I'm gonna pass the virtual mic to you, and then I'll jump in at the end.
So, the instructions are there. Can everybody hear me okay? Just looking at, all right. So the instructions are here, but I want to give you a little bit of context and just kind of echo what Nicole was saying earlier about the, this whole project is going to get us through understanding a little bit more about the intersectionality and how that applies to each and every one of us. So what I want you to do is on a scratch sheet of paper, write down one word. When you think of equity, what's the one word that comes to mind as being significant, signifying or exemplifying equity to you? So go ahead and write that word down. We don't have a chat box here, so we'll just have to. Want to give you a good amount of think time. So once you have your word, just give me a thumbs up in that way. Oh, no. All right. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Member Grossman, when you're ready.
Let me know if you want me to stop sharing the screen, by the way. Sometimes that gets in the way for folks.
All right, so let's go ahead and what I want you to do is just take a moment and share your word. I'm not going to call on who's going to go first. Share your word and why you chose that word. Tell us a little bit of context around why that word exemplifies equity for you. Okay, I can call on folks.
I don't mind going first. So I think there's a lot of potentially good words. So, but the first one that came to me was justice, and that I did like several of the other word associations in the slides that you brought up, and I wouldn't quarrel with them. But I think that when we look at inequity, we're looking at injustice. And that when we're looking at a system of equity as a system where people feel that justice is done and they're treated fairly and with dignity.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for speaking your truth.
I selected accountability with fairness. And the reason why I selected that was because I feel that all groups of people, multicultural, should have the same opportunities as other groups. So holding the powers that be accountable for their selection or making policies and implementing procedures that benefits all, not just, a certain group. So, yeah, I'll leave it right there.
Thank you for that. Member Mark.
I could go next. The word I wrote down was peace. And then after I wrote it, I was kind of second guessing myself. And I thought, well, does having racial equity mean there won't be any more wars? We won't be fighting with each other? And in a way, I think it does. In a lot of ways. And so I want to keep with that because to me, it would be a really wonderful thing if we could achieve that.
Peace. Beautiful. Beautiful. Member Grossman.
You're muted, Bart.
I also said fairness, although I struggled a lot with different combinations of words. There's an interesting problem, I think, because one is inclined to think, well, what if race didn't matter at all? What if that didn't exist? What if we simply didn't have that category? We didn't think And we used to say, back in the 60s, we wanted a colorblind society, but I think we all realize that's not what we mean. We see differences, but those differences shouldn't result in different treatment. And that's why I think fairness is a practical and specific way to represent that kind of distinction. People don't want to lose their identity; they just don't want to be punished for it. And I think that's what we have to preserve, that sense of you can be who you are, and that won't affect your opportunity in society.
Beautifully stated, beautifully stated. I'm going to consider this a safe space, and I'm going to reach out and I'm going to ask our assistant city manager and my neighborhood services manager to share as well. One word to what equity means for you.
I had also fairness. Yeah. Again, just because it's I wrote preservation because of what Bart said, just because it rings really true to me about if everybody's treated fairly, it doesn't matter, what the color of your skin is, or, it's just everybody is treated fairly just because they're human beings. So to me, that's what feels true. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for speaking your truth. Thank you for doing that. Ed, you feel comfortable sharing?
Certainly.
Yes.
I came up with equality. And it's been mentioned, I think, by almost everyone, and that is everybody should be given and have the same opportunities.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I know there's a couple of others on the call. And I don't want to, call people out of their positions, but if anybody else wants to share a word to what equity means, I just want to give a moment to be able to do that. All right, so our next part of this activity is now we all get to talk, and we're going to have a little conversation right here where your 5 words are justice, accountability, peace, fairness, and equality. So again, those words are justice, accountability, peace, fairness, and equality. And you got a little bit of a chance to hear and understand why everyone chose those words. And in fact, fairness was chosen twice. So that really speaks to where that word is it's resonating with folks when they think about and consider what equity means. And so, and we got to and I want to continue to remind us that we are talking specifically about racial equity. So I understand that we may want to talk about other challenges, but we're speaking specifically about racial equity. So anybody want to give a try to putting these words together into a sentence? Margie.
I just want to start out by saying that racial equity would be when all citizens have accountability, and then I don't have the rest of it, but I think everyone in Albany needs to have accountability for what we're doing. So I think we need to include all citizens in the accountability part of it.
Okay, that's definitely a start. Anybody can jump in, but this is how we start to wrestle with our definition of, and begin to think about what our definition of racial equity. So we have when all citizens have accountability.
Uh-oh. I'll place it on the screen for you all. Yeah. Sorry.
Go back one.
Yeah, no, I just have to reload it. That's all. It's not loaded.
Okay. Try it a little bit more, folks, while she's pulling that up.
Just so they have a visual of the words they use.
Justice, accountability, peace, fairness, and equality.
Yep. Come on, show up. There he goes. All right.
There it comes. Beautiful.
Just so you can see it.
All right, so I'm going to step back for a moment and see what you all come up with. When we started out with when all citizens have accountability, but remember, this is not my definition of racial equity. This is starting with the city of Albany, starting to define for itself, what does racial equity mean to us? I'm not with Albany, I'm helping you. So I'll step back a little bit and I want you to cover just one sentence where you incorporate these 5 words.
So when there is, I mean, just to get us started, when there is accountability to ensure fairness and equality for all, then there will be justice and peace.
Hi, Greg, one more time. Then we're
When
gonna
there
have-
is, and like I said, this is just to
Yep.
to get us started. When there is accountability to ensure that there is fairness and equality for all people, then there will be justice and peace.
Can we change that ensure to like, I put when all citizens have accountability to treat or held accountable to treat people with fairness and equality. This will define our justice and peace.
I like
One more
that,
time,
Janelle.
Janelle. Say it one more time, Janelle.
I said, when all citizens are accountable to treat people with fairness and equality, this will define our justice and peace.
I like it.
Nicole, did you get that down?
I'm getting close. They're still, I think they're still giving some input.
Yep.
Well, I'm just wondering, could we think of another word besides it would define our justice and peace? That it would result in justice and peace, right? I mean, is there a better word we could, I'm just thinking. Can you read the first part again?
When citizens are held accountable to ensure, held
Okay.
accountable to treat people with fairness and equality, it will result in justice and peace. And I might have missed a few words, Janelle. So when citizens are held accountable was what it morphed to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and I'll show you on the screen so you can see it yourself.
I mean, if we, like Marty's, if we don't use define, we can say this will result into true justice and peace. We can say that if we don't want to define what justice and peace looks like in our city, we can say it will result into true justice and peace. You can end it like that.
Okay. I don't want to say true justice and peace. To me,
Okay.
that seems like a bullshit word.
Mhm.
When you say true, like, then it might not be true. Like, so I don't want to put that word. I just want to say justice and peace.
Okay. But wouldn't accountability holding
Oh,
people?
no, I want the first part of it too.
No,
but-
I know what you're saying,
Yeah.
but wouldn't that define what that looks like in our community? We're holding people accountable. So this is what defines us. This is what separates us from other cities and
Okay.
understanding what justice and peace means in our community. So, I mean,
Yeah.
we're trying to shape this to fit our community and what justice and peace looks like. And so if we're holding people accountable for how they treat one another in our community, that defines what we as Albany citizens believe is justice, and it could result in peace, or it brings peace. I don't know. I just play. I think we
But
play around.
I like that. Yeah.
The idea of holding individuals accountable, I think we need to expand that. It's not just individuals, it's institutions, it's processes. We all of these things have to be accountable to a standard of equity.
Mhm.
But we have people that run those institutions that
Yes,
set
yeah.
the guidelines, policies.
Well,
behind
yeah.
that.
But
So we're keeping-
I'm also, it's not just citizens, of course, it's.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, but we have, people are accountable, but also the institutions that people create, the laws that we create, these things are not, they're administered by people, but they have ongoing life. And we have to constantly be reviewing those. To make
So are
sure
you
that they don't,
recommending removing citizens, that word citizens from it because it's too broad? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying we hold each other accountable. We also have to hold all our institutions accountable. All our laws, all our regulations, all of the structures that we create have to be accountable for equity.
Well, I wonder
Or how to
two
put that.
things. I think we want to shift citizens, to residents or people.
Yeah.
Narrowly. I think we certainly don't need to exclude non-citizens.
You mentioned community members when we had this dialogue before. Do you want to say community members? Okay. Yeah, I remember wrestling with that.
Community members and institutions.
And systems.
And systems, right. I think we want to think about when we want to get to a pause place on this to allow for public comment.
Yep. Yeah, we're actually, this is a great moment to pause, because we didn't want you to do this all tonight, by the way, but this is the beginning of some work that we're going to have to do together. So this is a great moment if there's any final thoughts.
And if you go to the next slide over, I think I've kind of captured, Nicole, the next, a little bit of what, adding Bart's comments.
Thank you. All right.
So it just gives you an idea of how this process that we're going to walk through can take your words, your thoughts, your vision, because everyone we walk into this, you all have your own definitions of equity, and realize that even with well-intentioned people, when we all come in, even with well-intentioned and sometimes very well thought out definitions of equity, if they're not the same, this can cause unnecessary consternation, even amidst folks that are headed towards the right direction and wanting to do the right thing. So this process is something that we're going to continue to walk through this and other activities to help you as a community further define what does equity mean, racial equity look like, feel like, and even a statement to exemplify this in Albany look like. So thank you for engaging in that. And Member Marks, I'll answer any questions related to that, and we can open it up for however you want to move forward.
I just wanted to say, instead of saying to treat people, could we say to treat each human?
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know what maybe you would rather use the word people, but.
There you go. Well, you'll continue to play with this. So
Okay.
remember when we talked about that whole experience non-closure? This is one of those moments. So I'm going to just put that out there, that you're not going to close this up. You're not going to, but here it is, that now we start to shift the conversation. So now when we're out in the community, we start to say, hey, you remember that meeting? And they were talking about that racial definition of equity. This is something that can springboard a conversation between you and someone else that does not, first of all, get into things that are going to get you, be sticky right now. Like, we don't want to jump into racial equity and then start talking politics. We don't want to do that. But what you can do is say, hey, what's one word that describes racial equity to you? And then you start a friendly dialogue with somebody. That's the way we start to your point earlier, Member Marks, how do we start to educate people? It starts with conversation. It starts with really talking about and defining what this is. So I can tell now I'm over my time, so I'm going to defer back, and we'll do more of this.
Yeah, and I think, kind of to close out, the purpose of this activity is to get you all thinking about your subcommittee work and how critical it's going to be to spend time really defining what racial equity is, so that as you start to talk to the community, you'll recognize that the whole blind men and elephant activity is going to happen. And that what we said tonight actually may be the total opposite when Margie and Bart go sit before students. Might be a total, literally the same prompts. You can do the same activity. I've done it 1,000 times with people. Every single time, there is a different version of what equity means in particular. And so I want you to be cognizant of that, because as SCJC, that's part of the data and that survey that you're going to notice when you ask the same question, what does racial equity mean to you? You're going to get a lot of different versions back. So it's going to be important that you take all of that information and be able to have a collective definition, which was harder to do. You notice step 3 was take everybody's one word and now make a sentence. Now that was a pretty easy one. Like Greg was like, hey, here it is real quick, right? But the reality is when you start having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and hopefully everybody, but you want to have a really good cross section of your community to weigh in on what this means. And you're going to see analyzing that data looks very different from analyzing with just 5 people. So this is the process that has to happen. And we want you to be thinking about how is it as a commission. Your subcommittee time is going to be important, because when you layer what does it look like for housing, that looks different for education, it looks different for policing, it looks different for business and community development. And that's the burden you have as a commission, that you have multiple layers of racial equity that you have to unpack. So hopefully you're seeing kind of the method to the madness, that this is the work you'll have to do as a subcommittee. And absolutely, I love Dr. Holt's recommendation is keep these conversations going through just that one question. What does racial equity mean to you? And literally your community forums coming up can absolutely be a space where you just have dialogue about that. I mean, it takes hours for people to unpack this because everyone's in a different space. So Greg, I'll close out with this slide just because I think we're pretty much kind of done with our part in terms of weighing in on your agenda items, but I want to just kind of give food for thought for next steps, if that's okay. And so reminders of like some of the deliverables for SCJC and some of your next steps, just to kind of wrap it up, is that you have your racial equity statement, which we just talked about, and going to be a very critical part of your plan. And you also want to make sure that that particular work is continuously done as a deliverable, which really will align with your larger plan around those subcommittee topics, right? Your housing piece, all those things that you've already started with SCJC. So we're just, again, continuing this work. There's going to be collection and review of data. So we talked about that. That's going to be important that this data actually informs. So Bart mentioned the surveys. This is including that piece. You're going to actually have to continue to think about the conversations about policing and the difference between the subcommittee work, the task force work, and we will absolutely as consultants support and give some recommendations about how that work looks. And make some recommendations. These are your deliverables, and the recommendations are based on the time frame that City Council really provides for you. So again, reminder, this work is go slow to go fast, but also remember you've done a great, tremendous amount of work already, and that you have created a platform to move this work forward. And so there are going to be some clear deadlines moving forward that City Council will provide. But at the end of the day, your action steps will really be based on the recommendations of action steps to city council will really be critical. So that timeline I mentioned was that we recommend monthly meetings that you all keep coming back together so the work doesn't get lost. And this is the culture you want to create, even as some of you will term out on SEJC. New members coming in should already understand the culture you've established, that we meet often. This is not just check the box kind of commission, right? Like we're getting our work done. That's important. And you've already established that culture. That's big. That there will be some city council updates. So November, December will be some opportunities to give some updates. And a lot of that may come through even our consultant work. We have collected a lot of data and we actually have some kind of big picture updates that we want to provide as well. Also the final impact plan in the summer of 2021. So this is going to require, remember we talked about this requires about a year to do this work to even create a plan. And then we do want to ask you about the plan for community listening sessions. I know we talked about that originally. We've only done one, but I think it's important that you have some more on the book. So I'm not sure if there's some dates that you all have been talking about or that we want to maybe collectively talk to staff. I don't know, Isabel, in terms of, you know, making sure that there's some calendar dates, some dates on the calendar that are open, because we know that it requires staff to support those listening sessions. But those are going to be pretty critical. And then the data collection, I'm not going to go through all of those because we've kind of talked a little bit about the surveying. But I do want to just pause and just see where you all stand on those community listening sessions, because we do want to carve out time for that. I just want to get you to weigh in as far as part of your next steps. Okay, so questions, thoughts, and definitely give us some insight on those community forums, where you want to go with those. And they're highly recommended at this point.
Bart?
Share for a second.
I think we should move toward having one in November. And what I would, you know, as we're winding up talking about the racial equity definition, the thing that started hitting me, and the thing that maybe I would want to see us focus on a bit with people in a listening session is, what's your experience? What is your experience that tells you that there is or is not equity in Albany? How do you know, what would it be, what would your experience be like? I mean, more operational kind of definition.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe I wouldn't have to be afraid that when my kid leaves the house, they're going to have a negative experience. How do we begin to identify sort of what those down to earth experiences are that people have that tell them they're not being treated equitably?
Got it. Appreciate that. Excellent.
And I think narrowly that, November is probably better for most people than December in terms of the press things. So I think we could possibly do early December. Obviously, as you get into mid-December, it gets hard.
Chair Downs,
yes.
One question for you, and I don't know if this is an option, is you have a meeting on November 4th, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct, Isabel? And I'm wondering if you want to utilize your SEJC meeting to actually host part of that as an agenda item. And I'm saying that kind of loosely because this is something to consider versus having a separate event. And the reason I'm thinking about is because of time frame, right? And trying to, like you said, Greg, like having something sooner than later, not wait until January, February, but to get something in before the end of the year so we can have some at least data. So I'm wondering how you feel about your November 4th meeting where you have, your subcommittee updates. You have, I know there's going to be an education forum for students. So there'll probably be an update then. But I'm wondering about, do you want to tie in your community listening session there? Or is that something that would be totally separate, considering I think the calendar, I'm just assuming may be impacted, but I don't know, Isabel, that's something you can weigh in on, but just I'm curious if the commissioner, that's an idea, or do you do something totally separate?
So I would imagine there are, calendar challenges. And so there's some utility in grabbing a spot that's available. A couple of things I would note, one of which is that's the day after the presidential election.
Right.
And part of me feels like there's a strong chance that people won't be able to talk about anything for the rest of that week except the presidential election.
Yeah.
And so in that sense that, regardless of the outcome, or if the outcome is not known, it's going to be a really hard day to reflect on, on broader issues. So as much as I like the idea of grabbing a calendar, I actually don't think it's a very strategic time. The other thing is, I think when we do it, we want to do it separately from a meeting, because I think the requirements of the meeting make it alienating for the public. And so I think if we want to have something bigger, then we need something closer toward a town hall or something. We might have our own meeting right afterwards, but I think inserting it into the meeting, is gonna feel clunky to people once we're governed by our regular meeting rules and agendas. Margie.
I would agree with you, Greg. I think the sooner we could have it, the better. And it shouldn't be with an SEJC meeting. We have too much going on, I think. That's my feeling.
So I wonder if it would make sense to look at weeks, any availability in that next week of November, and whether there's time then. That gives us enough space that, fingers crossed, the election will have been decided, and people may be able to kind of return to other thoughts to some degree, or not. But I think, the Wednesday after, I'm very doubtful of public meeting.
I'd probably be helpful if staff could give us an idea of what, what nights, days might work in terms of other meetings.
Yeah, we'll have to get back to you on that, because we, our city calendars really impacted all of our commission advisory bodies have resumed regular meetings. So it's always really difficult to find, additional time for commissions to meet, especially on weeknights. And then there's the holidays. There's, Thanksgiving, and then we get into the holiday season. And not to mention, the reseating of commissions and reorg of the council. So it's a very, very busy time. So we'd have to get back to you on that.
I appreciate it. I mean, I think I can imagine it's very busy, and but I think that second, third week of November, any time in there would be ideal if it becomes feasible on the city schedule.
Just a quick question, and I don't know, Isabel, have you seen this with any other commissions? I know listening sessions is not necessarily a normal process, and I know you have town halls, obviously the city council hosts. Have you ever had an agenda item where it was just dedicated to a listening session, or just an opportunity for dialogue? I'm just curious about the structure, because Greg mentioned some good points about those constraints when holding it through an SEJC platform. But I was curious about that.
Yeah, the council holds study sessions sometimes, to speak on, to hear and listen and learn and discuss a specific topic. And usually those happen before the regular meeting. Right. So the council meeting starts at 7:30, and they'll hold a study session depending on the topic and how much time is needed, starting at 6 p.m.
Yeah. Okay.
And commissions sometimes have had public hearings.
Yeah.
Sometimes not at the same time as a meeting.
Yeah. There's also a possibility of special meetings, like we did for the first listening session in July.
Mm-hmm. I think, Greg, you brought up a good point about November 4th. And I think you already had that meeting on the calendar, by the way. So I'm not sure if that was anticipated. It was right. I mean, obviously the elections was on a Tuesday. So I don't know if that
our regular SEJC meeting from Tuesday to Wednesday because of the election.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think, we can manage a regular meeting, but I think if we're trying to aim to pull in an especially broad public meeting, I think it would be a tough day to choose to pull that off.
Yeah, I agree. Okay. Well, it sounds like, Isabel, you'll get back to us all and try to coordinate something if it's even possible in November. I'm not sure. It sounds like it's going to be kind of tight for November and December, which, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, because if my memory serves me right, we had looked at other dates for the SCJC meeting because it fell on the same election day. And I think the only day we had was the Wednesday after. So I'll just check again just to confirm whether or not there are other dates.
Should we at this point go to public comment? We've been, and then we can come back. All right, so members of the public, I apologize it being so long. It's always hard to know in dealing with these, and especially in us figuring out how to engage via Zoom, including with the consultant. If we bring people in too early, that can be challenging to figure out what we're talking about. But I apologize for keeping you waiting. I see 2 participants with their hands raised. City staff will wave them in. And Jeremiah.
Hi, thank you very much. Jeremiah speaking. So thank you for finally allowing the public to at least get some input. The meeting's been going on for almost 2.5 hours, and public comment has only been available minuscule amount of time. But you keep saying this whole time, repeating yourselves, we got to get public input. We got to get public input. How do we do it? How do we do it? Oh yeah, make sure we get public input. And you guys asked these 5 words. It's like you didn't care about what the public's interpretation of the word meant. You know, and I was going to say human. And then I was going to say anti-discrimination. You know, so thanks for finally getting some input. And I've been suggesting a positive suggestion, you know, put a survey or at least a Zoom ID for the public on those big bellies, the trash cans on Solano. There's still cobwebs, are still really filthy. Public Works is so lazy because I'm sure we put this work order in months ago and they still haven't power washed Solano's big bellies. So my positive suggestion would be on the side of the big belly, the trash can, every time you have a meeting that's coming up, just put a flyer and put the Zoom ID number. So when people walk by the trash can, they could take their cell phone and be like, oh, look, Social and Economic Justice Committee meeting, you know, equity meeting. Oh, they take a snapshot with their phone and it's got the Zoom ID and the time so they can attend this. Because this thing is so untransparent. Oh, and the last word I want to add to that list is transparency. Equity is transparent. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah. Julie, I think you had your hand up and I think the city staff is moving you in. Although there you are.
Yeah, hi. And yes, it is Julie. It's interesting going behind Jeremiah because I have to agree. It's a weird feeling to be one of the few people attending this meeting and to be listening and not being asked, since obviously you do want to hear from the community. So I just wanted to say that, and that I appreciate the work on the social, the definition, and my words were distribution of power, because I think that's one of the biggest issues we have in our society is who holds the power. We can make up a lot of rules that we want to talk about and we can have good intentions, but if people who have the power hang on to it and don't let go of it, then we're in trouble. And one of the webinars that I watched, somebody gave a great example of an SRO at a school who was fighting for not having a police presence with a gun at a school, and knowing that he was going to lose his job, knowing he purposely gave up his power because he thought it was the right thing to do. And I would like to see more of that. And I don't see that happening in Albany. For example, it sounds like the city council is using their power to suppress SEJC. That's what it sounds like to me. And I think a little stepping away from people's power would be a good idea, and making space for other people. I also think that the Albany Police Department has institutional racism. I don't know whether they acknowledge it or not, but the fact that they chose a white police chief after a white police chief and didn't do an outside search, which I've brought up before, I think is a perfect example of institutional racism. But due to a lack of education and a lack of awareness and maybe a lack of exposure to webinars and speakers and books, they may not think of it that way. They just think it was a good decision. And finally, because this is really late, I also just wanted to bring up that if you do have these meetings, I would encourage you to the community listening sessions to have them earlier than this. And I would really like to see SEJC meet earlier too, because it's late for a lot of people. And I accidentally, the screen exposed how many participants. For a second, I had a different view of it, and it showed that there were 16 people. It looked like there were 4 of us attending. And that's due to I'm going to go to bed. So I'm going to tell you that item number 6.4, I'm going to speak on it right now, which is, I think you're not doing a good job of getting the word out. And I emailed the city with a suggestion that you have a citizens committee that actually does the outreach and communication, because obviously the staff can't handle it. And maybe it's just too much with all the other work that they do. But I would like to see a group of citizens, community members rather, who would help get the word out about meetings like this and what's happening and all of the meetings and things that you're trying to do. So thank you and good night.
Thank you, Roy. All right, I think that's the extent of public comment. Not seeing any others. We come back. So we had a few things on the table. The follow up on the statement, which I think, if I understood the consultants, that the proper and the most likely way for us to respond on that would be to take that back to our subcommittees and to bring that back forward from the subcommittees, to let us know your thoughts, the entirety of the commission thoughts at our next meeting, so that we can, be contemplating and discussing it there. I think we had some good work today, and I also agree that it's unlikely that we would get to a resolution on it at this time, as well as we will look forward to a sense of what dates are available for, and we can brainstorm at the subcommittee level as well, what type of format might work, whether, a sort of town hall, a listening session, and how to focus it in terms of what types of questions we want to pose or be particularly advertising our interest in. More, sort of more tasks for the subcommittees to take on, as well as in their own meetings, which, may or may not involve the consultant's presence in the meetings, but you can certainly reach out to them for guidance. Any other follow-up discussion on 6.3? Sid, I see you. I bet you're going to tell us we need a motion.
Yes, we're going to have to extend the meeting at 10.
Yes. So we need to extend within the next 4 minutes. Is there a motion of extension? Margie, I'll take Margie's thumbs up as a motion to extend. Is there a second? There is a second. Is it okay for it to be indefinite in that respect, Sid, or does it have to be for a definite period of time?
Yes.
It's okay for it to
You
be.
need to choose a time. Yeah, you need to.
Time. All right, Margie, since it's your motion, do you want to pick an amount?
10:30.
10:30. Okay, you accept that? Okay, so we've got an amended motion, and I assume you're seconding your amendation of the motion. Any discussion? Okay, then Commissioner Grossman?
I know it's late and I don't want to make a big fuss, but I'm going to vote no for a change, because I think we extend these meetings past our point of functionality. And we continue to talk about things when we're really not functioning very well anymore. And the problem is that those things really don't get very good hearings because it's too late for us to really pay attention. So I'm going to suggest that we think in the future about being perhaps a little bit more reasonable about how many things we can put on an agenda and finish within a reasonable amount of time, so that we don't find ourselves late at night not really being able to listen very well anymore.
Right, and I would agree. I with Julie. Like, maybe we can move these meetings up, because I go to bed early. No, I'm just playing. We get tired. Our brain stops working, and we're getting older. So I'm just saying, let's move it up. 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Sounds like a plan. And like Bart said, let's limit some of the items that's on the agenda. I mean, especially with the consultants on, I think that we maybe should have just focused on that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then had our tasks on what we should do next, right? And then trying try to, go through the other agenda items on the next meeting. So I think we should be more cognizant of that and our each other's time and our brains. So that's all.
Commissioner Marks.
Given what Bart just said, I think we should table the communications again, because I'm not really prepared to have any kind of lengthy discussion about it. And I think we do need to talk about it. I mean, it's a topic that the public has brought up with us on many occasions, and I think it needs consideration, and I don't feel like I'm up for it for tonight. But
I'd agree. I mean, and I think we need to have a little bit more research on, I know we've talked about putting advertisement or meetings in different places, but
just to put a note on things, we'll reach a point where we will be out of session. So either we need a motion or we will go out of session.
Oh.
And talk through the motion and then talk past 10 o'clock.
We have a motion and a second.
Okay. So let's have a vote on it. So motion and a second. Commissioner Grossman.
You want
to extend to 10:30?
Yeah, I'll abstain.
Okay. Commissioner Geary.
10:30.
Yes. Commissioner Marks.
yes.
And I vote yes. Okay. So motion carried to extend to 10:30. So, having completed that, we can, decide whether we want to, I'm hearing two different things, one, a suggestion on 6.4 communication and outreach of tabling that. But then I think Commissioner Geary, you were introducing discussion of it, and I don't want to stop that. So, I think, let's decide if we want to talk about 6.4, let's talk about it. And if we don't, then let's decide to move on to 6.5. I mean, I think we all think it's valuable, but in terms of those issues, Commissioner Grossman.
I think we should table it and make it the first item at our next meeting.
What are other thoughts on this?
I would agree. I'm in agreement with that.
You're all right with that, Commissioner Geary?
Okay. I mean, well, let me ask you this. Do you think that we can, I don't know, assign one of us to work with the city so we can have, do a little bit of research so we can be more prepared? Or does it matter if I don't know how that works.
To be like a point person on communication and outreach?
Yes. To work with
this could take on, the task of, engaging with city staff about what's done and what's out there. So.
Yeah. Okay.
We have to designate someone officially, but if somebody wants to volunteer, certainly this would be an appropriate time.
I guess I will because I brought it up. So.
All right.
So
we'll look forward to you leading us in this item on the next meeting.
Sounds good.
Everybody's good. Okay, 6.5. So here I think mental health services, I'm not sure that we have an SEJC update, and if so, it would have been from Commissioner Kerr. No council acted. Is that what you're coming in to say, Isabel?
Yeah, I do have a brief update that I'd like to share with the commission. Yeah, okay. So I wanted to let the commission know that the mayor, vice mayor, city manager, and I met with the chief of staff of Supervisor Carson to discuss mental health services in Albany. And her name is Ms. Strago, and she listened to our concerns regarding the change in geographic area covered by Berkeley and the resulting loss in services available nearby to Albany residents. We also talked about the lack of adequate communication regarding the transition of services to the county and the availability of funding. So she will, her next step was to reach out to the county staff for input, and she will reach back to us when she has more information to share.
Thank you for that, Isabel. Any follow-up, Commissioner Grossman and Commissioner Geary?
So what is our current status? Are we now receiving any services from Berkeley, or we have passed that deadline?
Berkeley is still providing mobile crisis services to Albany up until June 30th, 2021. And for those people who were in service already with the city of Berkeley as of July 1st, if they wish to continue to be served by Berkeley, they have that choice. But any new client in need of mental health services would go to the county.
What does that mean exactly, go to the county?
Would have to seek services at the county level.
Yeah, so it seems to me that we need to get some information out to people if that's the current situation, so that.
And that's what we've talked about with the
Yeah.
county, is that there hasn't been any communication about the transition, and we're not quite clear as to what services the county provides and where people can go to get them.
Yeah.
So those were all part of the discussion we had with Ms. Strago.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
My only question and concern is, I know you stated that that she will get back with you once she has information. What's the time frame? Like, have you given her 24 hours, 48 hours? Because what I would hate to see that we drop the ball, or is sometimes it gets to November and we're in January and we're still waiting on her to give us information. So this is a sense of urgency, because there's, I'm sure, a lot of people that are suffering from that right now. And so we want to make sure that we have the resources available. So I guess that's my question, like, what are the next steps, and then the plan to go ahead and move this forward?
Right, so the next step is for Ms. Strago to get back to us once she talks to staff. She didn't specify a time frame, but understand the urgency of the matter.
Okay. And so you or someone, the mayor and vice mayor, will follow up with them within a week or so, or? Okay.
Mhm.
Let's, at this point, ask for public comment. If there's anyone with public comment on this 6-5 mental health services and this update, raise your hand. Okay, not seeing any, we can go back to our discussion. Thank you. Any other discussion from commissioners?
I think you have a hand raised.
Oh, we do have a hand raised,
Yep.
You're right.
Mhm.
So if staff could bring in Jeremiah. And you're in.
Thank you. Just a point of interest, maybe we can work on this, is every time when you call for public comment, just say, we're calling on public comment for agenda item da-da-da-da-da. Instead of just saying public comment. That way people know exactly what you're talking about. And I do know what agenda item this is, because, that's what I've been saying about the big bellies and letting the city know how to get involved, right? And how are we going to communicate this? How are we going to make these surveys possible? And so, open up a positive suggestion box. Communication outreach is very important. And tonight in the meeting, you didn't really give the public an opportunity to put their word in there, and I'm just wondering, you guys had these meetings so late and you guys are watching these slideshows. I'm just wondering, like, Nicole can't email you these slideshows sometime during the week, or you guys can't review this before the meeting? Because it seems kind of like you guys are all just learning tonight, and you guys could have all reviewed this kind of stuff before. And it's kind of a show for the public. Like, you guys are having this public meeting, but all these slideshows and all these screenshots are all these words you're typing right in front of the public's eyes. It kind of makes the public think that you guys aren't all together. I mean, you guys are just willy-nilly just throwing these words and throwing these very important quotes all together in this meeting, and without the public's input. It's not, I'm not saying you're selfish, but you keep talking about public's input, but you didn't ask for, our word. Or in this outreach program, I haven't seen anything in Albany. So just let me know what I could do to help. You know, Elaine would want me to continue helping the city and continue being involved. So that's what I'm going to continue doing. So let me know if there's a way I could help. You know, I could stand on Solano, you know, with surveys. I know COVID-19 is not possible, but yeah. So just every time you bring some public comment, chair down, just say, okay, we'd like to open for public comment on agenda item 6.2, da 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 da. Instead of just saying, okay, public comment. Okay, no one raised their hand. Let's move on. So that's all my positive suggestions. If you really want the community's input, or some ideas.
Thank you, Jeremiah. So any further discussion on item 6.5 mental health services, the update? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Isabel, for that update and for city staff's follow through on this. And we appreciate it and look forward to seeing it as it develops. So appreciate that. Item 6.6 is the quarterly report provided by Berkeley Food and Housing Project on Albany Project Hope. If you're following on your computer or smartphone, there's a hyperlink below 6.6 that takes you to the fourth quarter report, which is a document, a rather extensive document that is attached as a separate file to our agenda. So why don't we do any initial questions, or I don't know if there's a staff introduction to this. It looks like there might be.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that in first questions, and then we'll take public comment and then return.
Thank you, Chair Downs and Commissioners. The agenda item this evening for your review is the fourth quarter report of our Albany Project Hope program. Berkeley Food and Housing Project continues to provide housing navigation and outreach through our Albany Project Hope program. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a significant impact on BFHP Albany Project Hope performance measures and targets. While outreach contacts have decreased, there have been significant increases in housing, case plans performed, and new clients housed. During the COVID-19 pandemic, individuals in need of shelter were referred by the Albany Police Department, Albany Cares, and the Albany community members to the program. The use of motel assistance was enormously successful in helping maintain the safety and health of Albany clients. The stabilization offered by the motels allowed housing navigators to create housing stability plans and identify each client's immediate needs. The report also includes the annual client survey results. Some of the challenges that BFHP faced were due largely to COVID-19. Housing navigators supporting clients were impacted by closures of services. Providers, including social services, Social Security Administration, and the Department of Motor Vehicles, were closed during a period of time. Efforts to help clients replace IDs, Social Security cards, and other documents are required for most housing programs. Housing navigators have contacted other resources for help with these processes with some success. We're happy to answer any of your questions.
Commissioner Marks.
I'm sorry, it's not a question. I just want to make a comment.
Sure.
I've been working with the homeless in Albany for about 4 years. And during that time, people have been housed intermittently and it hasn't really worked for them. But in the last, I would say last year and a half, people are getting housed and they're staying housed. And they really like their housing. I saw a mother and daughter that came to the showers on a regular basis for over 3 years. They're in a house in Richmond. They love it. They feel like they're being very well taken care of. The housing coordinators have done such a much better job in the last year or so, and it's made a huge difference in how people feel. And our next job is we're going to work on getting Jeremiah housed in Albany. So that's going to happen. But I just want to thank the city. You got some great housing coordinators, and it's made a huge difference as far as people. I mean, they were housing the homeless in places that didn't work for them and then blazing the homeless because they didn't like it. And now they're really taking a lot of care to find places that actually work for people. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? All right, then at this point, let's go to public comment. So we're taking public comment now on item 6-6, which is on Albany Project Hope and the quarterly report provided by the Berkeley Food and Housing Project. I see at least one member of the public with a hand raised. And Jeremiah, you're
All
on.
right, thank you very much. Oh boy, thank you very much, Margie. I really do hope the housing works in Albany. I hope possibly we could call it Albany, food and housing someday, because for a while, Project Hope, it seems like no hope. A couple weeks ago, I finally got an acceptance letter and then an exit letter a week later. The passing of my wife, Elaine, I was very grateful that the housing program did put me in a hotel for about 5 days, and that was great. But it's like staying in the hotel room alone, it was kind of selfish because I got this king size bed, a shower, and it was all for Elaine. And, I could hardly take a shower. It's so difficult because it's so emotional for me. Nobody really gets it. Here I'm in this king size bed for 7 days. Well, we've been asking for showers for months. You could have said, okay, Jeremiah, one hotel a month. Here, you could take a hotel once a week. So that's 7 weeks. That could have been spread out a long time. And it was so easy for this lady. Oh, and then I'll extend you for 2 weeks, Jeremiah. No problem. That's 14 days. That would have been 14 weeks of showers, one shower every week. But no. When was the last time Elaine or I got to shower? February, March, when YMCA was open. So it's like a lot of things need to be happening. And I was trying to get this housing, and boy, whoever's running this program, they're not very transparent. They hide a lot of things. They don't tell you a lot of things. They don't explain anything. They try to get me a place, and then in the last minute, the lady goes, oh, by the way, Jeremiah, we can't co-sign. You need a co-signer. The day I'm trying to sign a lease. Well, thanks, because I could have had a co-signer ready and there at the spot. So if you're going to have this program, you need to say, okay, here's the income cap. And oh, by the way, we can't co-sign. We'll help you make some payments, but we can't co-sign. So you want to find a co-signer. That should be the first thing they should say. Let's go find a co-signer. We can't do it. Nothing. It's just a big misunderstanding. And all this Berkeley Food and Housing, she goes, oh, we got all these landlords lined up in Berkeley. How about Berkeley, Jeremiah? How about Berkeley? I'm like, I'm not leaving Albany. You can't pay me to leave Albany. I'd rather be homeless in Albany than live in an apartment in Berkeley. So they've got landlords and lined up. They're just stealing Albany's money left and right. It's terrible. We need Project Albany Food and Housing. Enough of Berkeley.
Thank you, Jeremiah. All right, any follow-up discussion on this agenda item? All right, so I'm not seeing any. I'm making sure that I'm seeing all the members of the commission. Not seeing any. Then we're ready to move on from item 6.6. So Sid, thank you for that update and appreciate the quarterly reports. And that concludes 6.6. So that concludes the business of the meeting other than future agenda items. So I know that we have the vandalism of the Gilman tract, which I apologize was not put on this agenda, and B, the communication and outreach. I assume that we will also have updates from our subcommittees for the equity action plan, equity impact plan. Other items that people want to put on for future agenda items. Commissioner Grossman.
Yeah, I'm hoping we'll get a further update on mental health.
So further update on mental health. Any other items for from commissioners for future agenda items? Okay. So I appreciate that. And so just to make sure that we're all clear, we have the Gilman Tract vandalism discussion. We have communication outreach, update on mental health, and subcommittees for equity impact plan. All right. Well, thanks so much. Our next meeting is Wednesday because of the advisability of not having an election night itself. So Wednesday, November the 4th at 7:30. It says council chambers or virtual meeting, but I am virtually sure it'll be a virtual meeting, you know, as much as I would like to see you all in person. And at that meeting, we'll, you know, we'll resume these. With that, I think we have come to a close and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for all of your work. And we will look forward to seeing you in subcommittees and at next month's meeting.